Thank you, colleagues. The question is that Amendment 2B be agreed to, and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Faisal Chowdhury for a point of order.
Sorry, I couldn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Chowdhury. We will ensure that is recorded. I call Oliver Mundell for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I couldn't connect. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Mundell. We will ensure that is recorded. And I call Neil Gray for a point of order.
It appears that my vote has been recorded. I wasn't certain, but just to be clear, I would have voted no.
I can confirm your vote was recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 2B in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 50, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 2C in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 2. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question is that amendment 2C be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. I call Shirley-Anne Somerville for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I am unable to connect and I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Somerville. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Jenny Gilruth for a point of order.
I was unable to connect, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Just bear with me one moment, Ms Gilruth. I'm just going to request your microphone. Can I just ask, yes, if you'd just like to use Mr Mason's microphone, that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Connect, I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Gilruth. We'll ensure that's recorded. I call Colette Stevenson for a point of order.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. My app wouldn't connect either and I would have voted no. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Stevenson. We'll ensure that's recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 2C in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 51, no 67. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Jackie Bailey to press or withdraw amendment 2 as amended.
I move. Unpressed.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. The question is that Amendment 2, as amended, be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are agreed. I call Amendment 52 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 2. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question is that Amendment 52 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. The vote is closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 52 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 50, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 53 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 2. Mark Ruskell, to move or not move?
Not moved.
The amendment is not moved. I call Amendment 3 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 2. Minister, to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. And the question is that Amendment 3 be agreed to. Are we all agreed?
Yes.
We are agreed. We move on to Group 2, Freedom of Information. And I call Amendment 54 in the name of Katie Clark, grouped with Amendment 86. Katie Clark, to move Amendment 54 and speak to both amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I'm pleased to speak to my amendments on freedom of information. Significant amounts of money are spent on care in Scotland, and in recent years the private sector care industry has grown significantly. Ownership structures have become ever more complex and opaque. For example, data from the Register of Scotland by the Ferret shows that at the end of 2019, at least 44 Scottish care homes were owned by companies based in tax havens, including Jersey, the Isle of Man and Gibraltar. I will speak about this more later in the debate on my amendments on tax transparency, but the reason that I mention it now is I think that it highlights the importance of the changes in the sector, as it means more of the care sector has become outside of the scope of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002. Of course, I'd be happy to take.
I'm very grateful to Katie Clark for taking the intervention. She raises a very important point that as this industry becomes more complex and its ownership is more diverse, the actual people who it should be caring for are much further remote from their data, their information, and the amendments that you propose, along with other freedom of information amendments in other places, would at last allow access to actually what is held and how decisions are being made. Would Katie Clark agree?
I think the member makes an incredibly important point, and the challenges of COVID, I think, demonstrated the importance of this enforceable right to information, because what we saw during COVID was that this sector, which cares for some of our most vulnerable people, had very different rules depending on whether it was owned by the public sector or elsewhere. And what we found during COVID was that the families of those in care homes, where homes were run by local authorities, were able to access information, whilst when many of those companies were owned in the private sector, it simply wasn't possible to get that information. And I think that's one of the reasons that there is such a body of opinion in favour of extending freedom of information to the care sector. However, ministers have thus far refused to use their Section 5 powers under the Freedom of Information Act.
Let's call Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to Katie Clark for giving way. I am interested in her amendments. Liberals care passionately about freedom of information. However, I am anxious also about blurring the lines between public accountability and private accountability. We have freedom of information so that elected members and officials can justify their decisions. But when we start extending freedom of information to private companies, there's, I think, a dichotomy there in terms of the rights of private companies to conduct commercially sensitive business practices, profit margins and the rest of it. And that almost misses out the original intent of freedom of information, which was democratic accountability of local decision-making.
Indeed, the intention of the Freedom of Information Act was to provide transparency about public services, that's services that are paid for by the taxpayer. And the proposals that I am making only relate to the activities of private companies insofar as they are providing public services. And the intention of the 2002 Act was always that it would be possible to designate care providers in the private and non-profit making sectors. However, what we've seen is a failure by governments over more than 20 years to extend into those areas. It had always been envisaged that these kinds of services that are provided by the state and paid for by the state would be enforceable by the Freedom of Information Act. But what we've seen in recent years is the outsourcing of services and increasingly services provided by organisations that are not public authorities, such as local government. An independent polling undertaken by the Scottish Information Commissioner in 2024 confirmed that there was overwhelming public support for legal change, with 93% believing that freedom of information should cover publicly funded services such as care homes. And I think that's the essential point, is the fact that these are services that are now being provided by organisations such as multinationals, such as offshore trust-owned care homes that originally would have been provided in the public sector.
Katie Clark take an intervention?
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful for Katie Clark giving way. I'm keen to tease this out. Surely I think that the point that Katie Clark's amendments seek to address really is subject to the due diligence of local authorities commissioning this care, and public money being put to use for the delivery of care should ensure that councillors, council officers are satisfied that they are getting the best value for money, the best quality for money, and that actually this is, I think, potentially sets a precedent whereby any private provider in receipt of public funding should be subject to freedom of information. Now, that may be where she wants to take this, but I think that's potentially a bigger debate than we have in front of us.
Katie Clark.
Seems to be arguing for contract compliance, and what I would say is indeed that is something that does happen often, that a local authority or indeed the Scottish Government will have to provide information under freedom of information that is requested and obtain that information from the organisation that that public body has contracted with. This is about the individual member of the public having the direct right to that information from the organisation that is providing a taxpayer paid for service. And of course the important point, particularly in relation to private companies, is it's only the services that are paid for by the taxpayer that would have to be compliant with freedom of information. Anything else that the organisation did. So for example, if within the same care home there was a place that was paid for in a different way and that was paid for privately, that would not be within the scope of freedom of information. However, the reality, as we know, is that many care homes only have places that are funded by the taxpayer. And what we saw during COVID was that if that care home had been a local authority care home, information was being provided to families, which was of great significance to that family, gave that family a great deal of comfort. And we have this lack of transparency when that service is provided by another type of organisation, such as a care home that's or owned by a multinational. And we know that many of these organisations, and Southern Cross is perhaps the most noteworthy example, have very vulnerable systems, and it's at the end of the day the family and the person in care who suffers when an organisation such as Southern Cross goes bust, and that's maybe something I'll have an opportunity to talk about later in my amendments on tax transparency. So my amendments today seek to address the transparency deficit by extending the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002 to the care sector. Amendment 54 designates the care homes that would be relevant, which is as defined under the Public Services Reform Scotland Act 2010. And Amendment 86 requires that these provisions would come into force 2 years after royal assent. So the impact of these amendments would be that individuals would be able to exercise and enforce freedom of information rights directly with service providers, and would strengthen the legal clarity for the Scottish Information Commissioner and indeed for designated bodies and requesters. As I say, I'll say a little bit more about the changing nature of the care sector, hopefully later on in this debate. But I would argue that it's this changing nature of the care sector that make these amendments so important. I appreciate that the Scottish Government is likely to say that they are not imposed in principle to these amendments, but they wish to undertake a consultation with the sector. These amendments enable consultation with the sector on how freedom of information is extended to the sector, not on whether it should be extended. And I would say it is a principle that if it's the taxpayer that's paying for a service, that the public should have that right to information. It was always the intention of the 2002 Act, when it was passed, that taxpayer-funded public services would be covered by freedom of information. And after a 20-year delay, these amendments guarantee that within 2 years of royal assent, publicly funded care would be covered by freedom of information, and the public would have more rights to know how their money is being spent. So I move the amendments in my name.
Thank you, Ms Clark. And I now call on the Minister.
I'm grateful to Katie Clark for engaging with me on the issue of FOI extension since stage 2. I welcome the greater clarity she provided regarding the services to which she seeks to extend FOI law. Nevertheless, the Scottish Government cannot support these amendments. We have already made a clear public commitment that we will consult on the extension of the Freedom of Information Scotland Act 2002 FOISA to most of the services to which these amendments relate. Indeed, work's already commenced to engage key stakeholders in developing the approach to consultation through the establishment of a dedicated advisory group which is actively taking forward work on this. The Scottish Government recognises the importance of access to information and the value of the statutory rights provided by FOISA. That's why we've committed to consult on their extension in the sector. And designation under FOISA brings a number of clear statutory obligations. These are intended to be proportionate. However, we must fully consider and consult affected stakeholders about the impact on organisations before making them subject to FOI law. For that reason, Ministers are required by Section 5 of FOISA to consult before exercising their order-making power to extend FOI law to organisations not previously covered. Certainly.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Further to my exchange with Katie Clark, Liberal Democrats are interested in supporting these amendments, largely because I think Katie Clark has very eloquently identified a gap in information that is provided, particularly to care residents and their relatives, in respect of private providers. It doesn't seem that the government are entirely closed off to the idea, but would rather extend to consultation and further policy down the line. But does she recognise that this is a gap right now?
Minister.
I think the government does recognise it's a gap. That's why we're consulting on it. That's why we are very keen. We have stated our intent to we've committed to consult on the extension to the sector because we recognise there's a gap. But I don't think we can skip the step of consultation. We have to and are statutorily required by Section 5 of FOISA to consult before exercising the order-making power to extend FOI law to organisations which weren't previously covered. And the consultation currently being developed therefore remains appropriate and essential in the Scottish Government's view, and supporting these amendments from Katie Clark would remove the opportunity for that important process of consultation to continue. Certainly.
Can I thank the Minister for giving way, and Greens are also sympathetic to this very limited extension of FOI law. But could she say a bit more about this consultation? Will it be a consultation specifically on extending this to the social care sector? When will it be concluded? When will it be expected that any particular changes to the FOI law will be brought forward on the back of a consultation should the Scottish Government agree to take this further forward?
Minister.
So, as I've stated, the work has already commenced to engage key stakeholders in our development of the approach to consultation, and we've established a dedicated advisory group which is actively taking forward the work on this. I think I've been absolutely clear that the government does not want to skip the step of consultation. We agree with asking the question. That's why we've committed to consult, and I think it's really important that we do consult with the sector before bringing forward this change. I therefore urge members not to support these amendments.
Thank you. I now call on Katie Clark to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 54. Ms Clark.
Amendment 54.
Thank you. The question is, did Amendment 54 be agreed? Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on Amendment 54 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 33, no 83. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 4 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 2. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 4 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendments 5, 6, 7, 8, all in the name of the Minister and all previously debated with Amendment 2. I invite the Minister to move Amendments 5 to 8 en bloc. Minister.
Moved en bloc.
Thank you. Do any members object to the amendments being taken en bloc? No. The question is therefore that Amendments 5 to 8 are agreed. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 9 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 2. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 9 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. We've moved to Group 3, carers. I call Amendment 10 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Minister to move Amendment 10 and speak to all other amendments in the group. Minister.
I'll briefly speak first to my own amendments in this group, which are all of a minor technical nature, tidying up after stage 2. Amendment 10 updates a cross-reference amendments 11 to 15 and 17, shorten the way breaks are referred to, as the meaning of break will be defined by Amendment 18, which is simply tidying up the definition of that expression agreed at stage 2. Amendments 20 to 23 deal with the consequential repeal of provisions in the 2016 Carers Act that are no longer needed. I was pleased at stage 2 to support Gillian Mackay's amendment adding section 39A to the bill on short break services statements. It's important that people caring for others know how to access short breaks. I noted at stage 2 that some adjustments to the new section were needed to clarify the duties, and I discussed those with Gillian Mackay and carers representative organisations to ensure that the intention behind the original amendment is met in a way that gives clarity to local authorities who publish these statements. Amendment 24 to 29 make those adjustments. Turning to the other members in this group, members' amendments in this group, I'm pleased to support Jackie Bailey's Amendment 16, which will underline that regulations setting out what constitutes sufficient breaks for carers should recognise the importance of their having time for rest and leisure. I recognise the pressures which many carers are under and the importance of ensuring that carers can access breaks to maintain and improve their well-being. As I said at stage 2, the definition of sufficient breaks will be developed in partnership with carers to ensure that their lived experience is properly reflected. Amendment 16 affirms the commitment to that in legislation, and I encourage members across the chamber to support it. I also support and thank Mr Balfour for Amendment 1 to enshrine in legislation a duty to assist carers in accessing support, including income maximisation. We already have a range of supports in place for carers, including statutory duties on local authorities, Social Security Scotland signposting to support and funding for local carer centres. However, I share Mr Balfour's desire to keep improving how we support carers now and in years to come. I cannot, however, support Brian Whittle's Amendment 63. I recognise the importance of transparency in spending on local carer support, but that's already been recognised in previous sessions of this Parliament, and those existing powers under the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Act 2014 are sufficient to specify financial reporting by integration joint boards. The 2014 Act also requires publication of an annual performance report, and subordinate legislation made by Scottish ministers already requires that to include information on amounts spent on carer support. If Mr Whittle feels that all of the information that he wants is not already being provided through that mechanism, I'll be pleased to discuss with him what changes should be made to ensure that the information is provided. But Amendment 63 is the wrong way to go about getting it. It risks creating confusion and unnecessary burdens on bodies which are already subject to statutory duties to provide information of this kind. I would therefore ask Brian Whittle not to move Amendment 63, and I would say to him that my door is always open to him, as it is to all members across the chamber, to explore how we can improve financial transparency within an already comprehensive statutory system.
Thank you. I now call on Jackie Bailey to speak to Amendment 16 and other amendments in the group. Ms Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I also thank the Minister for responding to a number of the amendments at stage 2 of the bill. Scottish Labour supports the Government's amendments in this group, and can I turn to Amendment 16? It is essential that carers are supported to have a life alongside caring and to protect their own well-being. As such, I've been clear in my support of the proposed right to breaks for unpaid carers. I've also previously highlighted a desire for a clear definition of sufficient breaks. I am supportive of the Minister's intention to consult on the content of regulations to further define the meaning of sufficient breaks, so that carers and those that support them have the opportunity to have an input. I'm sure we can all agree that carers need time to recharge and relax and to help them look after themselves. So I put forward this amendment to ensure that whatever form that definition takes, it recognises Unpaid carers need to have time for rest and leisure. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Jeremy Balfour to speak to Amendment 1 and other amendments in the group. Mr Balfour.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I also thank the Minister for her constructive engagement over the last few days. And I recognise that I am late to the show on this, but I do think it is an important amendment if it is agreed by the Chamber this afternoon. We all want to see unpaid carers be able to maximise the amount of money that they are entitled to. We hear often, I'm sure, from constituents that they go to one public body and fill out a form, and then they've got to go to another public body, another public body and another public body. And for people who have already got stressful, busy lives, this can put them off maximising the benefit that they are entitled to. For that reason, this amendment would make sure that the appropriate body that they went to in the first place was then responsible for not only signposting, but actually helping them complete the forms necessary to get that. Now, that happens within our local authority already in many cases, but I'm sure, again, we've heard many stories of either local authorities not being able to provide those services or people slipping through the net. And also, local authorities aren't responsible for any kind of work with other bodies out with themselves. The same is true for Social Security Scotland, who again are very good at signposting individuals to the benefits they are entitled to here in Scotland, but have no duty in regard to doing that for local authorities or other appropriate groups. So I think this amendment will just clarify the situation. I think it is an amendment that allows both stakeholders and government and other interested parties, when these regulations come forward, to make sure that we get them right and to be correctly consulted on. So I do hope that this amendment will be accepted by the Chamber. Thank you, Deputy President.
Thank you. And I call on Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 63 and all other amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. My Amendment 63 seeks to improve reporting on spending for carer support and was co-drafted with and is supported by the Coalition of Carers Scotland. This amendment seeks to provide transparency in how funding is spent to ensure it is delivering for carers. Now, I understand that IGBs and HSCPs already produce reports on spending on money used to support carers in their annual accounts and annual reports. However, the reports are not detailed enough to understand the impact of the spending on carers. Equally, IGBs and HSCPs in some cases are currently unable to break down spending on implementation of the Carers Act 2016 when FOI'd, meaning we are unsure how the money is spent to deliver support for carers. And we actually heard evidence of this in the Health and Sport and Social Care Committee, where money that is designated and meant to be there to support carers is not reaching them in the end. And I think that is something that we must support. We must make sure that they are receiving the care that they need. So I move that amendment in my name. Yes.
Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Brian Whittle for taking the intervention on that point, and really it develops what he's talking about. The Minister said that there should be confidence that this information is available through other means and via other vehicles. Does the member share my concern that actually that is not the case, and that the crucial parts of the information are sometimes unable to be obtained, and that this amendment would place a duty on putting the priority of the information that people need to understand, to see how the money is spent, to see what the effect is, in one place, and covers over any misunderstandings that might be of what should or should not be disclosed?
And Whittle.
Can I thank Mark Whitfield for that intervention? He's absolutely right. I mean, I think if money is there and is designed to be put into the pockets of carers, we must be able to follow that money and make sure that it does enter the pockets of carers. And currently, what we've heard in the Health and Sport Committee is that's not necessarily the case. So all this amendment is trying to do is make sure that that information is readily available. I would also like to lend my support to Amendment 1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour. in 2024, Policy and Practice reported that 529,000 carers were eligible for carers allowance across the UK, but it had not been claimed. Scottish figures don't exist, however, when we factor on Scottish population share, that equates to around 42,000 carers missing out on an average of £4,259 per annum. Mr Balfour's amendment seeks to facilitate access to those benefits if a carer presents themselves to a relevant body. If you ask for help, help is facilitated, and I support that, and I'm very glad that the Government is supporting that as well. I would say that we are minded to support the Scottish Government amendments in this, with the caveat around 10, and if the Minister would actually explain to us why there's an insertion of 10A as opposed to 10, and what it is that we're missing out from 10 and moving it to 10A, that would be really helpful in our deliberations. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On the issue of Amendment 63, so just to be absolutely clear, the Government is happy to support amendments from Jackie Bailey number 16 and amendments from Jeremy Balfour number 1. Do have concern about Amendment 63 and the concern around that. I mean, I share Brian Whittle's concern. Ministers and officials repeatedly hear concerns from carer stakeholders over a lack of transparency in spending on carer support. COSLA has agreed to work with local authorities and IJBs to improve that. We are committed to improving the financial transparency of integration authority spending, including on social care. But I don't think that the amendment that Mr Whittle has laid down will do that. I think, in fact, it will cause confusion and duplication around reporting requirements, which runs counter, I think, to the intent of the amendment. The health and social care partnerships referred to in the amendment are not a legal entity. They're just a working arrangements between the various actors involved in the delivery of community health and social care services. And it also refers to unpaid carers, which is not a term that's used in the 2016 Act, certainly.
Brian Whittle.
I'm very grateful for the Minister giving way, but the IJBs are within control of the Scottish Government and are funded through the Scottish Government, and it's their responsibility to make sure that any finances that are set there to be in a carer's pocket actually make it to the carer's pocket. Surely it's an IJB's responsibility to be able to follow that money.
Minister. I think that the IJBs do have a responsibility to publish transparent information around finances. We said repeatedly at both Health and Social Care and Sport Committee and at the Finance FPAC Committee that it's really important that we're able to follow the money, and we don't feel, even I do not feel adequately empowered to follow the money in terms of the Carers Act spending. I just don't think that this amendment will improve the situation. I think we need to work with stakeholders and partners like our local authority colleagues, like our IJBs, in making sure that we can spot where the money goes and follow it through from source to spending. I share the frustration of carers organisations that they are unable to do that. As I said, I don't think this amendment will bring any more clarity than the powers that we already have. You asked about Amendment 10 and Amendment 10A. I think the clarity that you're looking for is around the definition of breaks. Can I just check with the member?
To the Chair. Sorry. Mr Whittle.
I just want to understand why we've removed 10 and moved it to 10A, and what the difference between 10 and 10A is.
Minister.
10A was introduced at stage 2, and 10A removes the concern that the current definition encompasses breaks that are unrelated to the caring role. It explicitly confirms that breaks can be taken with the cared for person, and it describes different arrangements for such breaks taken together and how they're linked to the caring role. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that Amendment 10 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendments 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. All in the name of the Minister, and all previously debated with Amendment 10. I invite the Minister to move Amendments 11 to 15 en bloc. Minister.
Moved en bloc.
Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 11 to 15? No. The question is therefore that Amendments 11 to 15 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 16 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 10. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 16 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendments 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28 and 29. All in the name of the Minister and all previously debated with Amendment 10. I invite the Minister to move Amendments 17 to 29 en bloc.
Moved.
Thank you. Does any member object to a single question being put on Amendments 17 to 29? No. Therefore, the question is that Amendments 17 to 29 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call Amendment 1 in the name of Jeremy Balfour, already debated with Amendment 10. Jeremy Balfour, to move or not move?
Move.
The question is that Amendment 1 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. We move to Group 4, Care Homes Rights to Visits. I call Amendment 30 in the name of Jackie Bailey, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings. Jackie Bailey to move Amendment 30 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This next set of amendments is in relation to Anne's Law and is about setting out a clear system of protecting the rights of family members to visit their loved ones in care homes. Can I pay tribute to the Care Homes Relatives Group and Campbell Duke, Anne's husband, and their daughter Natasha for their patience and for getting us here today. Let me speak to Amendments 30, 31, 32, 35, 36, 37 and 38 in my name. On Amendment 30, I wish to remove the words "use their best endeavours" in relation to the duty on care home providers to identify for every resident at least one individual as an essential care supporter. This would strengthen the duty on care home providers to identify an essential care supporter for each resident to ensure that it is not an optional extra or a tick box exercise. That said, I understand in practice there will be situations where, sadly, it is not possible to identify someone because the resident has no family or friends. And of course, some residents may not wish to identify someone at all. To allow for these circumstances, that is why I have also suggested Amendment 31 in addition to Amendment 30. Following on from Amendment 30, where I removed "use their best endeavours," I now wish to ensure that care home providers take into account people's wishes and circumstances when identifying an essential care supporter. Therefore, I have suggested some exceptions to identifying someone, namely in circumstances where the resident does not want one, or no one can be identified who is able or willing to take on that role. I'm sure everyone will agree that while it is important that everybody has the right to identify an essential care supporter, they also have the right not to choose someone. Can I turn to Amendment 32? The vital role of the essential care supporter is the essence of Anne's Law. With this amendment, I seek to put beyond doubt that the identification of the essential care supporter is undertaken in a consultative manner with the resident and others. This will mean that care home providers will not make these decisions on their own and will require to consult with relatives and others to identify an appropriate essential care supporter. On Amendments 35 and 36, I think we can all agree that the process of suspending visits should require a high bar. We need to get this right, and I have listened to care home relatives concerned around this, and I know the Minister has too. That is why I have proposed Amendments 35 and 36, which ensure oversight of decisions on visiting. These amendments have been developed in consultation with relatives and others, including the Care Inspectorate. Indeed.
Alex Cole-Hamilton.
I'm very grateful to Jackie Bailey for taking my intervention. I think we have come, Presiding Officer, to the meat of this legislation today, and it is the principal reason that it will enjoy Liberal Democrat support. I would like to offer Jackie Bailey the support of Liberal Democrats for her amendments on this, and in particular around decisions to suspend care home visiting. We can all agree that when the story of our pandemic is written, the tragedy of that story is written in our care homes, and in the suspension, the isolation that people felt when they were deprived of the loved and support of their family members and those close to them, it led to the exacerbation of things like dementia. Does she agree that with her amendments we will take a big leap forward to making sure that a story like that can never be told again?
Jackie Bailey.
I absolutely agree with the comments of Alex Cole-Hamilton, and I have to say I think the Chamber would unanimously agree with the comments of Alex Cole-Hamilton. It's something that I think cast a long shadow during the pandemic, and I very much welcome the collaborative approach taken by the Minister with the Care Home Relatives Group and the Care Inspectorate to get these amendments over the line. In finishing talking about Amendments 35 and 36, let me just set out to the Chamber that they require that care homes review, when asked to do so, a decision about the suspension of visits for someone and to notify the Care Inspectorate when they decide to suspend visiting. Amendment 36 ensures that these provisions are included within the Code of Practice, which will be published by Scottish ministers. Finally, turning to Amendments 37 and 38, Anne's Law will only be realised if care home staff work collaboratively with people living in care homes and their friends and family, including essential care supporters. That is why I have suggested Amendment 38 and the related Amendment 37. Amendment 38 will allow Scottish ministers to include within the Code of Practice what they consider to be best practice as to how that should be done. It will mean that visits are facilitated in a way that best supports residents' needs, putting them and their families at the heart of decisions. Taken together, these amendments will strengthen Anne's Law so we do not have a repeat of the experience of relatives trying to visit loved ones during the pandemic. Thank you.
Can I ask you to move the amendment?
I move the amendment.
Thank you. I call Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 55 and other amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'll start by saying I'm not going to move Amendment 55 because I think it's a similar amendment brought forward by Jackie Bailey's Amendment 35. I'm most happy to work with the Minister and her officials on Amendment 57, 58, 59, 16, 62, and I will be moving these amendments. Amendment 57 ensures, in respect of Anne's Law Code of Practice, that there is a timely written communication about any changes to visiting arrangements with the people affected, such as those living in care homes and their friends and family, including essential care supporters. The communication should include the reasons for any changes, and these reasons are provided in writing. I push for written communication to be part of the Code of Practice so that those in care and their essential care supporter have records as to why a visit has been denied. We learned much from our experience during the pandemic, and I think having these records are part of what we've learned is important. Amendment 59 creates mechanism for feedback in Anne's Law within the Code of Practice, which ministers must consider during revision of the Code. It is important that the experience of those who are most affected by a Code of Practice on care home residents' rights to visit, the residents themselves and their family and friends, providers of care home accommodation and their staff, is taken into consideration when each review of the Code is undertaken. In addition, the Care Inspectorate is uniquely placed to offer any informed view of how well the Code is working in practice and any changes that could improve it. During Stage 2, my amendment that Anne's Law needed to be published publicly and in easy read format was agreed. Amendment 58 omits the word easy read format, which I recognise does not have any concrete legal meaning, in favour of Amendment 60, which is a better description of easy read. It is essential that the Code of Practice for Anne's Law can be understood by a wide range of people. These include people with learning difficulties or other conditions that affect how they process information. That is why I brought forward Amendment 60, which requires that when ministers publish the Code of Practice for Anne's Law, a version is produced that can be understood by people with learning difficulties or other conditions affecting how they process that information. Turning to Amendment 62, I think it's vital that we know how Anne's Law is working as intended and that we can ensure that any learning is captured and acted on in a meaningful and systematic way. And I'm glad the Minister has supported my view that a report on the operation of Anne's Law should be included on the face of the bill. I know this view is supported by the Law Society of Scotland, who noted that the current provisions within the bill lack a process of review or redress, although I would highlight they don't take any specific view on individual amendments, and I hope my amendments 62, 59 and 57 can help to address that. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And I call on the Minister to speak to Amendment 33 and other amendments in the group. Minister.
This group of amendments on Anne's Law is particularly important. It's everyone's job to ensure that Anne's Law is delivered in practice. And that's why these amendments focus on ensuring additional oversight and support around decisions and visiting, and ensuring the vital role of the essential care supporter in supporting wellbeing is fully recognised. I'm very grateful to opposition members for bringing these forward and for working with me to get them right. I would like to thank members of the Care Home Relatives Scotland and many others for their constructive engagement with us to get this right. I welcome Jackie Bailey's amendments 30, 31 and 32. I recognise the essential care supporters, the role essential care supporters play in providing their loved ones with regular care and support. I agree it's only right that the identification of this individual is undertaken in a consultative manner, involving the resident and those closest to them. And I also agree that there's a need for limited exceptions to the requirement to identify such a person. And I think these amendments provide the appropriate flexibility. I also support Jackie Bailey's amendments 35 and 36. Based on our learning from the pandemic, there is general agreement that more should be done to ensure that there is greater oversight of decisions on suspending visiting. These amendments provide a requirement for care home providers to review a decision about the suspension of visits and notify the Care Inspectorate when they decide to suspend. This amendment will ensure that there are appropriate checks and balances on providers' decisions. I cannot support Amendment 55, which has been proposed by Brian Whittle, but it's not necessary, as Brian Whittle said, because it broadly duplicates the notification process provided for by Amendment 35. So I appreciate Mr Whittle's confirmation that he's not going to move it. I will also not be supporting Sandesh Galhani's Amendment 56. The Code of Practice will be primarily for care home providers to have regard to in fulfilling their duties under Anne's Law. The Code of Practice can't be used to create a new complaints process. There is already an existing legal framework for complaints, which would include decisions relating to visiting. The Code of Practice will also set out how the requirements imposed by virtue of Amendment 35 to review and notify are to be met. I welcome Amendments 37 and 38 in Jackie Bailey's name. I agree that Anne's Law will only work in practice if care home providers work collaboratively with residents and their friends and family. By having guidance in the Code on how staff should do just that, that means that residents' care plans will fully reflect their needs. Turning now to Brian Whittle's other amendments in this group, I'm pleased to support his Amendment 57. I agree that residents and families should always be informed timely about any changes to visiting. I also welcome his Amendment 59. I know from my own experience of working with groups like the Care Home Relatives Scotland during the preparation of this bill, the value of lived experience in developing and reviewing legislation and policy. I therefore recognise that gathering their feedback is vital in ensuring that any review of the code is meaningful. I also support Brian Whittle's Amendments 58 and 60. I agree that it is essential that the Code of Practice can be understood by the widest possible range of people, including people with learning difficulties or other conditions that affect how they process information. I also agree with Brian Whittle on Amendment 62. Reviewing the operation of the regulations after 2 years will provide an opportunity to check Anne's Law is working as intended. This will sit alongside other mechanisms for sharing learning and best practice at local and national level. This includes our National Oversight Group for Anne's Law, which brings together relatives, care home providers and health and social work professionals to share learning in a collaborative way. However, I am unable to support Amendment 61 in the name of Sandesh Galhani. Amendments 59 and 62 will provide for sufficient mechanisms for reporting and feedback on the delivery of Anne's Law. The Scottish Ministers will be required to consult the Care Inspectorate in carrying out a review of the Code of Practice on all the points specified by Amendment 61. The report on the operation of Anne's Law will also naturally involve significant involvement of the Care Inspectorate. I would consider that imposing a further requirement on the Care Inspectorate to produce an annual report on Anne's Law would be excessive and not the best use of resource. Turning briefly to my own amendments, Anne's Law will mean that where there is a need to suspend general visiting due to risks to life or health or well-being, some types of visits should always be supported. This includes end-of-life situations, as it may be the last chance for family and friends to see and interact with the resident. Amendment 33 would provide that visits should also be supported to people who have undergone or expected to undergo a significant deterioration in their physical or mental condition. A significant deterioration in someone's health or condition can be very frightening, and it's reasonable to expect that any resident would want and need the support of their family or friends. While the resident's death may not be anticipated in that period, it may be the last opportunity to interact with their family and loved ones. And this amendment is based on feedback from a number of stakeholders, including the Care Home Relatives Scotland. It's also vitally important that care home residents can spend time with their loved ones outside of the care home and engage in the community if that's their wish and if it's appropriate to do so. That's why Anne's Law will include a duty on care home providers to facilitate visits both in and out of the home. I've listened very carefully to stakeholders, including Scottish Care, who've highlighted a concern that a duty to facilitate visits might be taken to impose a positive obligation on care home service providers to physically take residents out on visits or arranging or paying for someone else to do so. That wasn't my intention, and so to address that concern, the limits of facilitating external visits are now clearly expressed by Amendment 34. In summary, I support and welcome Jackie Bailey's amendments 30, 31, 32, 35, 36, 37 and 38. I also support Brian Whittle's amendments 57, 58, 59, 60 and 62. I would also urge members to support my amendments in this group 33 and 34 and to reject Brian Whittle's amendment 55 and Sandesh Gulhani's amendments 56 and 61.
Thank you. And I call on Sandesh Gulhani to speak to Amendment 56 and other amendments in the group. Dr Gulhani.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And a declaration of interest as a practising NHS GP. Deputy Presiding Officer, Amendment 56 in my name seeks to ensure that there is a clear process of recourse within Anne's Law for those affected. It's essential that there's an explicit route of recourse which creates clear accountability for complaint and a clear process for dispute resolution. Stakeholders have been clear that they want proportionate oversight for Anne's Law. The Minister has argued that there is already a framework for complaints for social care. However, it is clear that a specific process for Anne's Law outlined in the Code would provide clarity and transparency for all involved. Anne's Law is a key element of what is left of this bill, and we must ensure that we take the opportunity to strengthen it as far as we possibly can to protect care home residents, their families and care supporters. This amendment is fully supported by the Social Work and Social Workers Association, and so I move Amendment 56 in my name. Amendment 61 in my name ensures that there is transparent reporting of the suspension of care home visits. This amendment establishes a duty of the Care Inspectorate to share the data and analysis and make any recommendation for changes to the code. This allows monitoring to ensure that any suspensions to the care home visitations have been applied proportionately. The Minister would surely agree that denying access to visits for care home residents has significant consequences, and regular reporting will allow any disproportionate use of this power to become evident and will enable changes to be made to the code when needed. Again, as I have previously mentioned, it's vital that we do all we can to ensure that Anne's Law is as robust as it can be for those affected. And again, this amendment is fully supported by the Social Work and Social Workers Association. So I move Amendment 61 in my name. I also move Manuscript Amendment 61A in my name, and this is just a technical. Just to add that we will be supporting all other amendments in this grouping, but given that the biggest part of this bill is Anne's Law, we need to make it as robust and as effective as possible, as it has taken us 3 years to get here.
Thank you. I now call Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I wish to put on record my support for the amendments in Jackie Bailey's name and the other amendments in this group. It has been a long time coming, and it is really important we get it right, but I want to join colleagues in paying tribute to Anne Duke's family, to Campbell, who's in the gallery today, who's one of my constituents from East Kilbride, and to members of the Care Home Relatives Scotland group, including Cathy Russell and Alison Leach, who I can see in the gallery. This has been their fight. It's been a fight for all those people in Scotland who did not have a voice during the pandemic. We hear a lot that we have to learn the lessons of COVID-19, and I know that the Care Home Relative Scotland Group have had more than 150 meetings with the Scottish Government. They really have done Scotland proud, and we all owe them a debt of thanks. And I think it's right, although there's been a delay in getting here, it's right that we get the detail right. So I listened with interest to the points made by Brian Whittle and Sandish Gulhani as well. This has always been about human rights. It has always been about dignity, about love, about human connection, and all that was lost during the pandemic. No one was ever dismissed and concerned about safety, but what happened during those COVID years was unsafe. It destroyed people's mental health, and people like Anne in her final days of life could not have that time with her family. So I listened to Natasha Hamilton, Anne's daughter, on the radio at 6:45 this morning before I came to work, and she made the case very strongly for this to go through. There's always been cross-party working across the Parliament. I see Paul McLennan here, Miles Briggs, so many others, Alex Cole-Hamilton, Gillian Mackay, and of course the Government has a mandate because Anne's Law was a very prominent promise in the 2021 SNP manifesto. But today is not a day for politics, it's just about getting this over the line. So I will remind colleagues of what I said back in February of 2021 in the Chamber, when I said I hope that we can get to a place where the Parliament can support Anne's Law, which would ensure that people never again have to spend a year in isolation without access to their loved ones. So, colleagues, I hope today is the day that we can give effect to Anne's Law and learn those lessons. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call on Jackie Bailey to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 30.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And can I associate myself with Monica Lennon's comments? There is a cross-party consensus on these amendments which give practical effect to Anne's Law. Can I thank the Minister for her work and her cooperation on this key part of the bill. And I want to again thank the Care Home Relatives Group for their persistence, thank Anne's husband Campbell and daughter Natasha for all their campaigning, because it is all of their combined efforts that have led us to these amendments here today. Taken together, these amendments should ensure that we don't have a repeat of relatives being kept away from loved ones in care homes, as we witnessed during the COVID pandemic. So I would urge the Chamber to support all the amendments before us in this group. Thank you.
The question is that Amendment 30 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 31 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with Amendment 30. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 31 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 32 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with Amendment 30.
Moved.
The question is that Amendment 32 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 55 in the name of Brian Whittle. Already debated with Amendment 30. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Not moved, Presiding Officer.
That is not moved. Question is, I call Amendment 33 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 30. Minister to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. Question is that Amendment 33 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 34 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 30. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 34 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Call Amendment 35 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with Amendment 30. Jackie Bailey to move. Question is that Amendment 35 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 36 in the name of Jackie Bailey. Already debated with Amendment 30. Jackie Bailey to move.
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 36 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Call Amendment 56 in the name of Sandish Gulhani. Already debated with Amendment 30. Sandish Gulhani to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that Amendment 56 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Shona Robertson.
Sorry, I couldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. I'll make sure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Brian Whittle.
My app wouldn't connect. Presiding officer, I would have voted yes.
I'll make sure that is recorded, Mr Whittle. Point of order, Colette Stevenson.
My app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Stevenson. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Liz Smith.
Voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Smith. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Russell Finlay.
I have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr Finlay. I'll make sure that is recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 56 in the name of Sanders Gulhani is yes 50, no 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. Call amendment 57 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 30. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 57 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call on amendment 37 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with amendment 30. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 37 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 38 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with amendment 30. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 38 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 58 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 30. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Move, presiding officer.
Question is that amendment 58 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 59 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 30. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Move, presiding officer.
Question is amendment 59 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 60 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 30. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Move, presiding officer.
Question is that amendment 60 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 61 in the name of Sanders Gulhani, already debated with amendment 30. Sanders Gulhani to move or not move? Question is that amendment 61 be agreed. Oh, no. Call amendment 61A in the name of Sanders Gulhani, already debated with amendment 30. Sanders Gulhani to move or not move? Thank you. Question is that amendment 61A be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Sanders Gulhani to press or withdraw amendment 61 as amended.
Moved.
The question is that 61A as amended be agreed. Question is that amendment 61 as amended be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Therefore, members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Shona Robertson.
Still having some difficulty. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. I'll make sure that is recorded. Point of order, Cocab Stewart.
Apologies, my app didn't work on time. I would have voted no. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Stewart. I'll make sure that is recorded. The result of the vote on Amendment 61 in the name of Sanders Colhani is yes 51, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call Amendment 62 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 30. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
The question is that Amendment 62 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed, and we move to Group 5, Health and Social Care Integration Principles. I call Amendment 39 in the name of Jackie Bailey, in a group on its own. Jackie Bailey to move and speak to Amendment 39. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This is one small amendment, all in a group of its own, so I should be quick. Amendment 39 in my name, and I move it at the start so I don't forget to do it at the end. At present, we have no power to update or amend the primary set of principles that apply to the planning and delivery of integrated health and social care services. Amendment 39 seeks to create a regulation-making power to amend the integration, planning and delivery principles which are set out in the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Act of 2014. Any such regulations would be subject to the affirmative parliamentary procedure. The 2014 Act sets out how these principles should be applied by local authorities, health boards and integration authorities. In creating this power, which allows us to amend existing principles rather than create new and separate ones, we will avoid adding complexity to the existing landscape of principles, outcomes and standards. So I move Amendment 39 in my name.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call the Minister.
I welcome Jackie Bailey's Amendment 39, which allows regulations to be used to modify the integration, planning and delivery principles within the Public Bodies Joint Working Scotland Act 2014, updating the principles to reflect changes to policy in the law and maintaining the current provision for how principles are applied and monitored will support consistency and continuity, reducing the risk of creating additional complexity to any existing principles, outcomes and standards.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Jackie Bailey to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 39.
Press Amendment 39.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 39 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed, and therefore there will be a division. The vote is now closed. I call Shona Robertson for a point of order.
Yep, still having technical problems. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Ms Robertson. Your vote will be recorded. I call Liam MacArthur for a point of order.
Thank you. My app froze. I would have voted yes.
Thank you, Mr MacArthur. Your vote will be recorded. I call Alec Rowley for a point of order.
I'd have voted yes, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Rowley. Your vote will be recorded. I call Bill Kidd for a point of order.
Hi, I'm afraid my phone is even more tired than me. I would have voted yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. Your vote will be recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 39 in the name of Jackie Bailey is yes, 92, no, 24. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore Agreed. I call Amendment 63 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 10. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 63 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. The result of the vote on amendment number 63 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 50, no 65. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 6 on care commissioning. I call Amendment 40 in the name of the Minister, grouped with Amendments 41, 64, 42 and 43. I call on the Minister to move Amendment 40 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'll begin with the amendments to Section 41 in this group. Section 41 will allow public bodies contracting for health and care services to confine the competition to win those contracts to third sector organisations. I believe it's important for the health and social care services market that contracting authorities can, where appropriate, carve out a space for third sector organisations to win contracts without having to always compete with the big for-profit giants in the sector. I also want to reiterate what I said at stage 2. We need a mixed market model to effectively deliver adult social care. This includes third sector, for-profit and public sector providers. Section 41 will not prevent this. It will be up to individual contracting authorities to decide which contracts to award through this reserved process, based on their knowledge of the local market and particular issues in their area. Amendments 40 and 41 in my name are technical and extend the range of contracts that can be made subject to this reserved process to include contracts for services to health boards and special health boards, as well as for those services provided under functions listed in the 2014 Joint Working Act. This ensures the policy intent of extending reserved contracting process to both health and social care services is met. Brian Whittle's Amendment 64 would remove Section 41 from the bill entirely, so that there cannot be a reserved contracting process for third sector organisations. This reflects Mr Whittle's view that there should be no reserved contracting process to support third sector organisations. That is Mr Whittle's position. As I've said, it is not my position, nor was it the position of the committee at stage 2, which rejected an identical amendment from Mr Whittle. For this reason, I do not support Brian Whittle's Amendment 64, and I urge members not to support the amendment. I welcome Amendment 42 from Jackie Baillie, which places the duty on ministers to issue guidance on ethical commissioning for integrated health and social care services. We know from Derek Feely's report, feedback we've had from providers, commissioners and people with lived experience of using these services, that experiences differ between local authority areas, and we don't want the quality of care delivered to be dependent on a person's postcode. Commissioners, social care providers and those who use these services have told us that a single set of national guidance which sets out the principles of ethical commissioning as well as practical implementation will be beneficial. So I therefore encourage members to support Amendment 42. I also welcome Jackie Baillie's Amendment 43. Contracting authorities authorities with expenditure over £5 million per annum are required to produce procurement strategies setting out how they intend to meet specific requirements within regulated procurements. Amendment 43 pulls together these procurement strategies with integration authority strategic plans so that a contracting authority who plans to carry out procurements for a health and social care integration authority has to say in its procurement strategy how it will go about that consistently with the integration authority's strategic plan. Integration authorities have told us that the separation between their functions of setting aims and objectives and the delivery functions resting with both local authorities and health boards can give rise to tension. Amendment 43 will help to close the implementation gap between strategy and delivery, requiring the procuring authority to demonstrate consistency with the strategic plan of the integration authority. In conclusion, I encourage members to support my amendments 40 and 41, Jackie Bailey's amendments 42 and 43, and to reject Brian Whittle's amendment 64. I move amendment 40.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 64 and other amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On Amendment 64 in relation to Section 41 of the Bill, while I note the Scottish Government has amended the section slightly, it's not immediately clear to me how the stated aim of a more flexible and mixed market is achieved through a mechanism allowing one section of providers to be locked out of that market for certain contracts. Now, I have sought to query this with the Minister. While I received responses, almost all of which were keen to emphasise the ultimate responsibility for the use of this mechanism would lie with local authorities, I am not sure the Scottish Government have managed to make this any clearer. I have also had discussions with various stakeholders whose views have ranged from broadly in favour to moderately concerned, with a fairly substantial number of stakeholders that are simply ambivalent. However, I have to say I was sufficiently frustrated by the lack of detail about the practical application of Section 41 that I do feel it necessary to raise it here again. Ultimately, the third sector care providers I spoke to about this section did seem broadly supportive of it, and as the Minister knows, I hold the third sector in very, very high regard, and because of that, because of their broad support for it, that is the reason I have decided I will not be moving this amendment. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle, and I call Jackie Bailey to speak to Amendment 42 and other amendments in the group. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. This amendment follows amendments at stage 2 from myself and Carol Mochan. Let me speak to Amendment 42 and 43 in my name. Amendment 42 seeks to address the gap which was highlighted in the independent review of adult social care between the commissioning intent and what is ultimately delivered. Whilst ministers are not responsible themselves for the commissioning of social care, this amendment places a duty on them to publish national ethical commissioning guidance to provide consistency of approach across Scotland. In preparing this guidance, ministers must consult with each local authority, health board, integration authority and integration joint monitoring committee, as well as representatives from various stakeholder groups involved in the delivery and receipt of care. This should ensure the guidance is meaningful and takes account of practical considerations. Amendment 43 requires contracting authorities' procurement strategies to be informed by the Integration Authority's strategic plan. It basically closes the implementation gap between policy and procurement practice by ensuring that the population needs assessment, commissioning decisions and planning, which are designed with service users during the strategic planning process, are actually reflected in the approach to procurement. By requiring procurement strategies to consider how procurement will deliver the strategic and commissioning objectives of integration authorities, procurement professionals will be empowered to focus on practice that meets those authorities' priorities, thus further integrating by providing alignment on the partnership's shared strategic objectives. Can I urge members to support the Minister's amendments in this group, my amendments, and reject the amendment from Brian Whittle? Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I call Carol Mochan.
Thank you. Thank you, Presiding Officer. I just wanted to speak to Amendment 42, which I know that Jackie Bailey and the Minister worked very hard to include international workers in this section. I think it's important to acknowledge that we do know that treatment of international workers can be less favourable, and so it's important that within this Ethical Commission we have the opportunity to combat anything in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Mochan. I now call on the Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just to confirm, I encourage members to support my amendments 41 42, Jackie Bailey's amendments 42 and 43, and I'm pleased to hear from Brian Whittle that he is not going to move Amendment 64. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that Amendment 40 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 41 in the name of the Minister, already debated with Amendment 40. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 41 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Thank you. I call Amendment 64 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 40. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Not move, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I call Amendment 42 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 40. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 42 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? We are. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 43 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with Amendment 40. Jackie Bailey to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 43 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. Before we move on to the next group, I would wish to correct the record in terms of the result of a previous vote. The vote result for Amendment 61 in Group 4 was in fact yes 51 and no 66, and there were no abstentions. That did not change the result of the vote. We now move on to Group 7, Care Inspectorate Powers. I call Amendment 65 in the name of Sanjesh Gohani in a group on its own. I call on Sanjesh Gohani to move and to speak to Amendment 65.
Deputy Presiding Officer, the intention behind Amendment 65 was to expand the enforcement powers of the Care Inspectorate with a view to improving standards of care, ensuring resources are available for increased use of inspection volunteers. However, after further discussions, I will not be moving Amendment 65.
Thank you, Dr Gohani. I call on the Minister.
This amendment was lodged at stage 2 and I was unable to support it then because it requires ministers to make regulations dealing with matters that are already dealt with by primary legislation passed by this Parliament. I'm grateful that Sandesh Gulhani is not going to move this amendment, and I suggest we all breathe a sigh of relief. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call Sandesh Gulhani to wind up by pressing or withdrawing Amendment 65.
Withdrawing.
Thank you, Dr Gulhani. I now move... Oh, yes, indeed. Dr Gulhani seeks to withdraw amendment number 65. Does any member object? No member objects. Amendment 65 is therefore withdrawn. I now move to... When? Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you. I'm just being advised of the what might come next. I turn now to Group 8 on social care workforce. I call Amendment 6. Point of order, Claire Hoggy.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On a point of order, I understand that Amendment 79 in this group, lodged by Jackie Bailey, contains provisions which are out with the legislative competence of the Scottish Parliament as they relate to employment rights and duties and industrial relations, which are of course reserved matters under Schedule 5 of the Scotland Act 1998. In line with Rule 9.10.5 of the Standing Orders, which establishes 4 criteria for the admissibility of amendments: A. Proper form, B. Relevance, C. Consistency with general principles, and D. Consistency with decisions already taken. Can you please confirm that legislative competence is not included in that criteria, and that neither the assistance of parliamentary clerks in drafting an amendment nor selection of an amendment for debate is an indication that an amendment is within legislative competence of this Parliament?
I thank Ms Hoggy for her point of order. I would advise that, as members will be aware, whether or not the subject matter of an amendment is within the legislative competence of the Parliament is not one of the criteria which will determine its admissibility. The presiding officer takes a view on the legislative competence of a bill at its introduction. Thereafter, it is a matter for the Parliament to decide whether to agree to an amendment that someone views as being out with the Parliament's legislative competence. Whether that amendment is or is not out with the Parliament's legislative competence can only be definitively determined by a court. Once a bill has been passed, there are various processes in place, as set out in the Scotland Act 1998, that may be initiated if someone views a bill or any of its provisions as being out with the Parliament's legislative competence. I trust that responds to the point made by the member. And I now would like to turn to Group 8. Jackie Bailey, point of order.
It's in relation to the point of order you've just received. I had intended to deal with this matter during the debate, but I do feel that there is a gap in the Parliament's procedures, and I wonder, Presiding Officer, whether in determining competence beyond stage 1, rather than leaving it to the Scottish Government to advise, there is actually a role for Parliament, and whether we could refer this issue to the Standards and Procedures Committee to report back to Parliament at a later stage.
I thank Ms Bailey for her point of order. I have stated very clearly what the position of the Parliament is as we speak. If the member wishes to promote a rule change in the Parliament, then the member knows exactly how best to go about that, given her years of experience in this place. I hope I can now turn to Group 8, Social Care Workforce. I call Amendment 66 in the name of Stephen Kerr, grouped with Amendments 76, 77, 79 and 80. I call on Stephen Kerr to move Amendment 66 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And like others who have spoken and are presenting amendments to the bill at stage 3, I do also come late to the party, as was said earlier. But I feel in reading the bill as it stands, there is an opportunity for us to strengthen the workforce planning element of social care. And that is why I seek to the support of the Chamber for Amendment 66, which seeks to introduce a statutory audit of the social care workforce on a recurring basis. This is a reasonable and measured proposal designed to strengthen the delivery and long-term sustainability of social care services in Scotland by ensuring that workforce planning is based on robust, regularly reviewed evidence. The bill rightly focuses on empowering service users, strengthening rights and improving outcomes. But we must recognise that none of that's achievable without a stable, supported and adequately resourced workforce. The success of the reforms we're legislating for now will ultimately rest on the shoulders of those delivering care in our homes, communities and institutions. And that's why we need a clear picture, not once, but repeatedly, of the state of that workforce, where the gaps are, what the challenges are, and where investment and reform are most needed. And Amendment 66 would place a duty on Scottish ministers to conduct an audit of the social care workforce every 7 years. The audit must not only report on the state of the workforce, including concerns around capacity and retention, but must also include a plan to address any issues identified. It is a duty not just to analyse, but to act. The 7-year timeframe is deliberate and considered. This is not about adding bureaucracy or duplicating existing short-term reporting. Rather, it is about enabling deep, strategic assessments to inform major reform cycles. It aligns with long-term workforce planning horizons and ensures continuity across parliaments and ministers. It avoids the risk of constant short-term tinkering while ensuring regular and predictable scrutiny of what remains one of the most critical components of our care system. Importantly, the definition of social care workforce in this amendment is broad and inclusive. It recognises not just those employed in traditional settings, but also personal assistants, support workers and others working through self-directed support. It acknowledges that the sector is pluralistic, delivered across public, private and third sectors, and increasingly shaped by individual choice and flexibility. Any audit must reflect that complexity if it is to be useful. This is particularly significant for rural, remote and island communities, where workforce fragility is most acute. In such areas, a single staff vacancy can jeopardise service continuity. Workforce shortages can force unnecessary hospital admissions, isolate individuals and place intolerable burdens on unpaid carers.
Absolutely. Martin Whitfield.
I'm very grateful to Stephen Kerr for taking the intervention. And on that point, he envisages an audit that is more than just a numbers game, but actually a report that will be laid before Parliament. Is it in that report that he anticipates the Government must address the questions of shortages, particularly in our rural and remote areas?
Stephen Kerr.
That's exactly the premise of the amendment. It's more than just collecting data. It's about using that data to form a plan upon which action will be based. So I agree with Martin Whitfield in his assessment and grateful for his intervention, because it's only by undertaking a regular detailed audit that examines capacity in these settings specifically that we can identify the unique challenges they face and respond accordingly. And, Presiding Officer, this amendment is not about headline-grabbing measures. It's about the infrastructure of good governance, ensuring we are tracking and responding to the needs of those who do the work upon which our care system depends. It is a modest but important step towards sustainability and accountability. And again, I would urge my fellow members to support it.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. I now call Cara Morgan to speak to Amendment 76 and other members in the group. Ms Morgan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I start by thanking the Minister and her officials for the work to ensure my amendments on fair work from stage 2 have managed to come back at stage 3. It's much appreciated. I'm going to speak to Amendment 76 and 77. Amendment 76 introduces a new duty on Scottish Ministers to develop, through consultation, and publish a fair work strategy for the care sector. This fair work strategy will establish what constitutes fair work in the care sector and set out how ministers will monitor and report on the extent to which progress towards fair work is being achieved. Where there is an assessment that improvements need to be made in the arrangements for fair work within the sector, ministers will be able to set out actions to address these issues. This may include, for example, guidance on what constitutes good fair work practices. My amendment provides that this fair work strategy should be reviewed every 3 years from the date that it is first published, which would be 18 months after commencement of these provisions. Establishing a duty of review will ensure that the strategy and the assessment of what constitutes fair work remains focused on the key issues for the care sector and its workforce over time. I am also proposing that the strategy is developed and kept under review through consultation, taking into account the views of those responsible for the delivery of care and those involved in the delivery and receipt of care services. Amendment 77 establishes annual reporting by Scottish Ministers on fair work in the care sector. These annual reports will support the monitoring of progress on fair work as set out in the Fair Work Strategy proposed under Amendment 76. Within the report, ministers will be required to make an assessment of improvements made towards achieving fair work in the care sector during the reporting period. Where improvements are considered to be limited, ministers must set out the reason for this and any actions they will take to make improvements. I also want to say that I think that Stephen Kerr's amendment is very reasonable and would be supporting that, and of course supporting the amendment from my colleague Jackie Bailey, which she will speak to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Morgan. I now call Jackie Bailey to speak to Amendment 79 and other amendments in the group. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I intend to speak to Amendments 79 and 80 in this group. In my view, one of the glaring gaps in this bill is the failure to tackle fair work. We know that Scotland is facing a workforce crisis in social care with chronic low pay and poor terms and conditions, meaning that staff are leaving the sector and choosing to work in retail where the pay is better and the pressure is less. We need to value our social care staff and make it a career that people want to choose. And I'm very pleased to see my friend Angela Rayner, as part of a UK Labour government, driving forward an employment rights bill, but we don't need to wait. We can act today in this chamber in areas that are devolved. Amendment 79 places a duty on Scottish ministers, to the extent permitted by any other enactment, to negotiate employment conditions for social care in Scotland through sectoral bargaining. This amendment also requires Scottish ministers to give effect to a minimum rate agreed through sectoral bargaining when determining the funding allocation for adult social care in the annual local government finance settlement and issuing guidance in the local government finance circular. All devolved. I appreciate, though, the concerns raised by the Minister regarding the legal competence of this amendment. It is a matter we have discussed before at some considerable length. And whilst I regard this amendment as being entirely competent, as it refers to sectoral bargaining in the context of the Scottish Government's devolved functions and nothing else, I would be prepared to withdraw if the Minister could make a robust statement on the progress of the Government's work on sectoral bargaining and firm commitments about delivery. I'm sure you will appreciate, Presiding Officer, my frustration that it has taken over 4 years since Derek Feely published his report, and the lack of progress on these matters is both frustrating and disappointing. As I said earlier, I think the Parliament should review its role in determining competence beyond stage 1 rather than leave it to the Scottish Government, and I will write to the Standards and Procedures Committee to ask them to do just that. Turning to Amendment 80 in my name, which is not judged to be incompetent, this amendment requires the Scottish Government to publish guidance to commissioning authorities on the inclusion of sectoral bargaining processes and outcomes in contract conditions, contract notices, bid documentation, award criteria, contract award and contract management. I have worked with the Minister and her officials in other amendments to improve the implementation gap that exists in current procurement legislation and guidance. This amendment seeks to go slightly further and ensure transparency and compliance with sectoral bargaining. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. I now call the Minister.
Our workforce is at the heart of delivering health and social care services to the people of Scotland, and this bill is crucial to ensuring that the workforce feel valued and supported. Amendment 66 from Stephen Kerr requires ministers to audit the social care workforce every 7 years. However, this would create duplication of work already done. This is why I do not support Amendment 66. Mr Kerr may not be aware, but ministers already have a duty under Section 58 of the Regulation of Care Scotland Act 2001 to monitor the number of social service workers needed and available, as well as other matters such as the adequacy of training provision for them. On top of that, there are annual reporting duties on ministers under the Health and Care Staffing Scotland Act 2019. The Scottish Social Services Council produces an annual workforce report, and there is a national workforce strategy. There is no shortage of information already being produced and dealing with exactly the matters Mr Kerr's amendment talks about. Of course, it is important that there is good quality data to inform policy on important issues, and this Parliament has legislated in previous sessions to ensure that data exists in relation to the social care workforce. And as a Parliament, we have to be very mindful that we do not waste taxpayers' money and divert public servants from serving the public by drowning them under layers of duplicative and unnecessary bureaucracy. That is what Amendment 66 would do, and I urge members to reject it, certainly.
Martin Whitfield.
Taking the intervention. My intervention on Stephen Kerr about his amendment was specifically in relation to that challenge that we have in our rural areas where a lack of staffing can cause potential problems which should light up red on a dashboard of concerns. Can the Minister confirm where in the current data and analysis we can see that potential crisis before it reaches a crisis?
Minister.
I think at the moment we have Scottish ministers already have a duty to prepare and lay before Parliament a report annually on staffing and care services in the Health and Care Staffing Scotland 2019 Act. So that's specifically a summary of how care providers, local authorities and integration authorities are discharging their duties, the effect that staffing levels have on the discharge of those duties, the steps ministers have taken to support staffing levels in care services to assist the discharge of duties, the steps that ministers have taken to ensure that funding is available to care services to assist the discharge of those duties, and how the above will be taken into account in determining the future supply of registered nurses, medical practitioners and other kinds of care professionals. I think because the 2019 Health and Care Act came into force in April 24. The first ministerial report will be laid before Parliament in October this year, and I think that may be why parliamentarians are unfamiliar with the richness of data and analysis that's going to be available through it. I am, however, and I'm not against the collection of data and reporting on it. I'm pleased to support Carol Mochan's amendments 76 and 77, requiring ministers to produce a Fair Work strategy for the care sector and to report on the extent to which this is being realised. Unlike Mr Kerr's Amendment 66, this isn't duplicating existing reporting requirements because there are currently no duties to report on fair work in the sector. The duty aligns with this government's existing commitment to advance fair work in social care and the work streams of Fair Work and Social Care group to improve pay and conditions. Annual reporting by ministers will ensure transparency on the data and our assessment of progress and provide accountability on any necessary actions to improve practice. I welcome the provisions provide time after commencement to develop an efficient and proportionate data collection and reporting process through consultation. The strategy should not create a reporting regime which creates unnecessary burdens on the system. I can't support Jackie Bailey's Amendment 79, which would require ministers to use sectoral bargaining to negotiate employment conditions. As we've already heard, the amendment is therefore about industrial relations, which is reserved to Westminster and therefore not within this Parliament's competence to legislate about. As members know, this Parliament has very limited scope for legislation in this area, and should this amendment be agreed today, the whole bill may be referred to the Supreme Court, which would impede getting royal assent for the bill for months, possibly for the rest of this session, certainly.
Jackie Bailey.
The Minister would have heard me very clearly saying that she should put out the progress made on the record so people could see advances in sectoral bargaining, which she would acknowledge is important to securing the workforce in social care.
Minister.
I certainly intend to do that, but I think it's really important that I set out the consequences of voting for this amendment too. The important areas of the bill where there are broad consensus for change across this Parliament, things like Anne's Law, the right to breaks from caring and independent advocacy, would be significantly delayed if this amendment is passed. And that is why I find it extremely disappointing, given the very clear issues of competence and the extensive engagement that has taken place since stage 2, that Jackie Bailey has chosen to lodge this amendment. I can assure the Chamber that I am committed to progressing sectoral bargaining for the social care sector. The Fair Work and Social Care Group has been working with the sector to develop a voluntary sectoral bargaining model to provide a mechanism to determine pay terms and conditions on a voluntary participation basis. And this government is constructively collaborating with the UK government on its employment rights bill. And whilst the provisions of that bill are being debated at Westminster, there is clear intent for it to establish provision for a national social care negotiating body for Scotland, which will offer the option of providing a statutory footing for setting pay terms and conditions for the social care workforce through fair pay agreements. With employment law being a reserved matter, it is only the UK Parliament that can take forward legislation in this area. Of course, I find that fact deeply regrettable. And if Jackie Bailey does too, we will be delighted to have her support in campaigning to have competence over employment matters and industrial relations transferred to this Parliament.
Jackie Bailey.
Forward to the Minister welcoming the actions of a UK Labour government, delivering when after 4 years you failed to do so.
Always through the chair, Minister.
We're ahead of the time we've already established.
I think, the reality is we are waiting for the UK government to catch up with the intent of the Scottish Parliament. But I am And it's rare you'll hear me say that in this chamber. I am delighted with the work that the UK Government are doing on the Employment Rights Bill. They have worked closely with us to ensure that it is fit for the sector in Scotland, and I am pleased with that. On Jackie Bailey's Amendment 80, it is not beyond the Parliament's competence. I appreciate what Jackie Bailey is trying to achieve with it. However, I do regret that she didn't work with us on the drafting, because the drafting that Jackie Bailey has put forward is suboptimal. The amendment would require ministers to produce guidance on sectoral bargaining and social care procurement, to which contracting authorities must have regard. Unfortunately, there is no definition of who these contracting authorities that are to be under the duty to have regard to the guidance are, nor is there any definition of social care procurement. So it's unclear who is to have regard to the guidance and in relation to what procurement activities they are to have regard to it. These are quite fundamental points. The amendment would also require ministers to take steps to support compliance with collective agreements. Again, there is a real problem with legislative clarity. There is no attempt in the amendment to define what a collective agreement is. However, I do support Jackie Bailey's intent within this amendment. Indeed, many of the elements called for in this amendment are already in current guidance or under development. And whilst I have concern about the drafting of this amendment as I have set out, I appreciate that standalone guidance may provide an opportunity to emphasise the importance of and the commitment to sectoral bargaining within social care, and therefore I will support this amendment. To summarise, I'll support and encourage others to support Carol Mochan's Amendments 76 and 77 and Jackie Bailey's Amendment 80 in this group. I would ask Stephen Kerr not to press Amendment 66 on the basis that his amendment duplicates existing law. And I would invite Jackie Bailey not to move Amendment 79, which risks causing the passage of this bill to be delayed for months by a referral to the UK Supreme Court.
Thank you, Minister. I now call on Stephen Kerr to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 66. Mr Kerr.
Well, there's no occasion, regardless of what the content of any bill is in this place, that we don't get into constitutional hilarity, and we had our fair share in this group of amendments. There is indeed a vow of silence.
Could we have less chit-chat from sedentary positions, Mr Kerr?
But I think the Minister has approached this, I think, perhaps from, if I may say, I think the wrong direction, because this is about using data, not drowning in data. I don't think that what this amendment does is creates a situation where our bureaucracy is going to be drowning in data. In fact, I think what we need to do is use the data that's available to us and seek opportunities to refresh and mine data in order to give us the information we need to make good quality decisions, both strategically and operationally. And that's what this amendment seeks to do. And I was grateful for the interventions of Martin Whitfield in this respect, because this is not just about our urban areas where there's a lot of focus, but it's also in those areas where staff issues are absolutely critical to delivery of any kind of a service at all. And I think the strategic dimension of what's proposed in this amendment makes it a worthy amendment for members to support. I also would like to draw the attention of colleagues again to the broadened definition of social care workforce that's contained in this amendment, which I think has value in and of itself, because that way we get the breadth and also the depth of data that we're required in order to maintain an ongoing and viable social care service. And so on that basis, Deputy Presiding Officer, I would move the amendment in my name.
Thank you, Mr Kerr. The question is that Amendment 66 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? No. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division, and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Alistair Allen. Sorry, Mr Allen, could you repeat what you're saying?
I attempted to vote no there. I'm seeking to find out if it registered.
No, your vote was not initially recorded, but it will now be recorded. Thank you. The result of the vote on amendment number 66 in the name of Stephen Kerr is yes, 51, no, 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 9, National Chief Social Work Advisor. I call Amendment 67 in the name of Sandesh Gohani. In a group on its own, I call on Sandesh Gohani to move and speak to Amendment 67.
Thank you, and I move the amendment in my name. I suppose the reason for this is because of the social work profession. So let me read you directly what the Professional Association for Social Work and Social Workers say about Amendment 67. This is the most important amendment in the bill from the perspective of the social work profession and its place in Scotland's public services, unless the legislation includes some high-level description of the functions of the National Chief Social Work Advisor. Their role and purpose remain at the discretion of Scottish ministers. Enshrining these functions and purpose in legislation ensures that the advisers and the agency have a clear statutory purpose in upholding the values and the ethics of the social work profession within government. So I urge Parliament to support the very people we are looking to empower, which is the social workers, and vote for this amendment.
Thank you, Dr Gohani. I call the Minister.
I'm afraid I cannot support Amendment 67 because it seeks to place in legislation further provision about the functions and purpose of the National Chief Social Work Advisor role. This creates restriction, preventing the role from evolving flexibly to meet the changing needs of the social work sector. And furthermore, it duplicates the professional development functions already provided for in legislation by the Regulation of Care Scotland Act 2001. Nor can I support the inclusion of social care within this amendment. Social care and social work are two distinct areas which should not be conflated. It strays beyond Feely's recommendations, which were clear about specific support for the social work sector. My amendment at stage 2 ensures that the Scottish ministers will have a designated National Chief Social Work Advisor and an agency named the National Social Work Agency to support them. The NCSWA will be responsible for preparing an annual report for Scottish ministers on the state of social work services and the social work workforce. Formalising the existing role of the Chief Social Work Advisor in statute signals its importance and centrality to the social work profession. The National Chief Social Work Advisor and the National Social Work Agency will focus solely on social work, promoting and supporting the social work profession in Scotland.
Thank you. I call on Sandesh Gohani to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 67.
Well, we heard what the Minister had to say, but I would urge Parliament to listen to social workers who want this amendment and have asked for it. And I press.
Thank you, Dr Gohani. The question is that Amendment 67 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their vote now. The vote is now closed. Point of order, Shirley-Ann Somerville.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm unsure whether that's gone through or not, so would like to check. It has.
I can say to Shirley-Ann Somerville that her vote has been recorded. The result of the vote on amendment number 67 in the name of Sandesh Gohani is yes, 52, no, 66. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. We now turn to Group 10 on care entitlements and assessments. I call Amendment 68 in the name of Paul Sweeney, grouped with Amendments 69, 48A, 48B, 83 and 84. I call Paul Sweeney to move Amendment 68 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Mr Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I rise to move Amendment 68 and the other 5 amendments in this group in my name. I'd like to start by thanking the Minister for her collegiate manner in discussing these amendments. I think they are all ones in which we agree with the intent. It was a question of making sure that the technical function of the amendments was correct. I also want to extend my thanks to her civil servants for their helpful involvement in drafting these amendments and trying to get them into the right place so that we can build consensus across the chamber. And I think it is very important because the effects of these amendments are reflected on the experience that we heard through the committee stage of the bill, the lived experience of many people in Scotland, and of course I'm sure many members will have similar experiences in their casework of disabled constituents who have had care packages and have to move between local authorities. So to speak to Amendment 68, this amendment will require the Scottish Ministers to make regulations to ensure community care services provided to a person with a disability are at least equivalent to those in the previous local authority area when they move to a new local authority area. Disabled persons... more than happy to give way to my friend.
I thank the member for taking that intervention. And does the member agree with me and acknowledge that this issue of portability of social care across local authorities has been a long-standing issue experienced by many disabled people and other social care users, sometimes preventing them from taking up work or education opportunities or indeed supporting other family members, and that this is a fundamental shift that would help to support the human rights of disabled people across Scotland if this amendment were to pass?
Paul Sweeney. I thank my friend for making that really important point. I think the function of these amendments will improve people's lives, and I think it is really exciting to see the opportunity it might have for the disabled community in our country and how it might improve their situation. As I mentioned, the disabled person's care package should provide at least equivalent care when they move from one local authority area to another, without the need for any further assessment or evaluation until the new local authority can carry out its own assessment of the disabled person's needs. That might vary according to proximity to family, to the conditions of the town or city they live in. But nonetheless, the key is no detriment, and I think that is a very powerful function of this amendment, and I commend it to the Chamber. And Amendment 69 will require Scottish Ministers to create regulations to specify timescales for an assessment of care needs for individuals who have a terminal illness. Another important factor that came through in our stakeholder engagement through the course of the bill at the Health, Social Care and Sport Committee was this issue of timeliness of care assessments. So these regulations will specify timescales around reassessments for increased care as a person's terminal illness progresses. I'm sure many of us went to the Dying in the Margins exhibition that was hosted by some of Scotland's hospices and saw the appalling situation where care packages simply don't keep up with the progression of disease, and ultimately it means that someone is having a bad death, that they are not able to die in the terms they would like, often in hospital, out of the familiar settings of their home, for example, because adaptations couldn't be made in time or care couldn't be provided within the home setting. We have to avoid that at all costs. I think it's a terrible indictment on our current situation that we have that happening, and I found the exhibition very moving. and I'm hopeful that this amendment will at least help to address some of those appalling cases that the exhibition featured, and I also commend it to the Chamber. Amendments 48A and 48B are largely technical in nature. They are essentially about ensuring that these provisions don't impact on the Care Reform Scotland Bill once enacted. So it's just to simply avoid any potential unintended consequences there. And Amendment 83, its effect is that regulations are to be made under the duty upon Scottish ministers, created at Amendment 68. Continuity of services for persons who have a disability are to be subject to the affirmative procedure. So again, that's slightly technical amendment, but nonetheless important to ensure the affirmative procedure is given action there. And also Amendment 84, this affects will require that regulations to be made under the duty upon Scottish ministers created at Amendment 69 timescales for assessment of persons who have a terminal illness are also to be subject to the affirmative procedure. And as an alumnus of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee, I do know how important the affirmative procedure is, so it's good that that is in place, and I welcome the Government's support in that regard, and I would commend all 6 amendments to the Chamber. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. I now call the Minister.
I'm pleased to say that I welcome and will be supporting all of the amendments in this group, and I'm grateful to Mr Sweeney for engaging constructively with me to get them right. Amendment 68 and the connected Amendments 48A and 83 will allow regulations to be made ensuring continuity of community care services when a person with a disability moves from one local authority area to another. We know how important it is for people to have that assurance so that they can move confidently from one part of the country to another without facing anxiety about major upheaval in their care arrangements. Amendment 69 and its connected Amendments 48B and 84 will allow timescales to be specified within which local authorities must undertake assessments and reassessments of care needs for people with a terminal illness. It is, of course, especially important for people with a terminal illness that their needs are assessed and met quickly, and for those needs to be revisited regularly as their condition progresses. I'm grateful to Mr Sweeney for bringing forward the amendments in this group, and I encourage members to support all of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. I call on Paul Sweeney to wind up and to press or withdraw Amendment 68.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I thank the Minister for her support to enact these amendments. I think we're in no doubt about the impact this will have on disabled people who can be assured that their care packages will be not detrimented by moving around, and this will provide greater opportunity for many disabled people in our communities across Scotland to move without fear. And similarly, those who suffer terminal illness can have the comfort that there will be a more rapid and timely evaluation of their care needs so that we can avoid any horrific circumstances where someone is facing a terminal illness and death in circumstances which they would not like to be in. And I think there's too many cases of this going on in Scotland. Of course, once a person has passed away, the family are just trying to get over the grief of that situation. They're not necessarily going to advocate for improvements. It's important for us as parliamentarians to rise to that challenge, and I commend the work of the Scottish hospices in particular and their relentless work to improve this situation in Scotland. So I think this is a very worthy improvement to the bill. Thank you.
And is Mr Sweeney pressing his amendment?
I certainly will be pressing those amendments.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. The question is that Amendment 68 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 69 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with Amendment 68. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Move, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. The question is that Amendment 69 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. The Parliament is agreed. We now turn to Group 11, Independent Information, Advice and Advocacy. I call Amendment 44 in the name of the Minister, grouped with amendments as shown in the groupings, and I call on the Minister to move Amendment 44 and to speak to all amendments in the group. Minister.
Thank you. I'll speak first to the amendments in my name in this group, which are simply technical in nature and I hope will be uncontroversial. Amendments 44 and 45 split existing section 13 in two, so that what will be left in section 13 is a regulation making power in relation to independent advocacy, and the regulation making power in relation to independent information and advice will appear in a separate section so that they're easier to follow. In consequence of that change and the fact that section 13 itself was moved within the bill at stage 2, my amendments 47, 48, 49 and 50 reposition the order in which section 13 and the new section created by amendment 45 are referred to within the section 46 of the bill. That's so that the lists of section numbers will run in the right order after the bill is passed. It doesn't change the legal effect. Turning to the more significant amendments from other members, I'll begin with Amendment 71 from Brian Whittle. I welcome this amendment and encourage members to support it. It provides for advocacy service standards to be introduced by regulations. I'm committed to ensuring the delivery of high-quality independent advocacy across Scotland, and this amendment will help with that, allowing us to develop the standards and regulations by engaging with providers in the sector and the people that they support. I also welcome Amendment 70 from Mr Whittle, which would require the providers of independent advocacy, advice and information services to collect anonymised data about those that they help, and for Scottish ministers to review the data and publish a report on it. There will be lessons we can learn from data on why people access these that could support improvements in the social care system. But it is important that we ensure that the collection and processing of anonymised data doesn't become overly burdensome for the relatively small organisations that operate in the sector. So that is something that we would need to consider before laying these regulations. Turning to Mr Ruskell's amendments, I welcome Amendments 72, 73 and 82 to put a definition of independent advocacy services on the face of the bill, and I would ask all members to support them. As I've already touched on, I also encourage members to support Mr Ruskell's Amendment 78, which would put ministers under a duty to review and report on the provision of independent advocacy funded by them. The Feely Review recommended an increase in the independent advocacy provision for people accessing social care support. I understand how important independent advocacy is in helping people to have their voice heard and in realising their rights. That is why we are providing £500,000 for the financial year 26-27 to increase provision of these vital services. Stakeholders like the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance support us, taking an incremental approach to increase provision to not overwhelm the sector. Going forward, by reviewing and reporting on our independent advocacy provision in the first 2 years and then every 4 years thereafter, we can ensure better planning and give more clarity to providers. I move Amendment 44.
Thank you, Minister. I now call Brian Whittle to speak to Amendment 71 and other amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I think this bill has shone an unexpected light on independent advocacy, and I'm glad I was able to work with the Minister and her officials to agree Amendment 71. This amendment requires advocacy services standards to be introduced in secondary legislation to try and ensure a consistent level of quality for all independent advocacy providers in relation to public social care services across Scotland. It will also help to ensure delivery of high quality of independent advocacy provision, as anyone providing independent advocacy in relation to supporting someone receiving public social care services must comply with those standards. On Amendment 70, I did consult with the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance before submission. I do understand they have concern about this amendment's interaction with Mark Ruskell's Amendment 78, and I await his talking to that amendment, although I do note that the Scottish Government plan to vote with it. This Amendment 70 seeks to understand the reasons why people are engaging with independent advocacy. Is this arising from a need of additional support or simply a need to navigate the system? If passed, anonymised data will be collected to inform ministers about how the social care system is working, so they have the evidence base to enact improvements. Over time, if ministers use this data effectively, it also has the potential to decrease pressure on the sector, as fewer people will engage an independent advocacy service to navigate the social care system where no other additional support is required of these services. And I am glad the Minister has indicated her support for this amendment. With regard to Amendments 72 and 73, in the name of Mark Ruskell, I do think they strengthen the definition of independence beyond Stage 2 wording, and I would urge the Chamber to support them. Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. And I call Mark Ruskell to speak to Amendment 72 and other amendments in the group. Mr Ruskell.
Thank you very much. Can I start by thanking Minister and officials for constructive engagement on this really important issue that came up at Stage 2. And I think there is a consensus here within this group of amendments. We'll be happy to support Mr Whittle's amendments in this group and the government amendments too. Amendments 72 and 73 are designed to provide that clearer definition of independent advocacy services to avoid the ambiguity in how the legislation is applied. And these definitions are important to ensure that advocacy is genuinely independent, as this is critical for ensuring people are properly supported to have their voice heard. So I hope that this will improve awareness and understanding of this support to really help people realise their human rights. 78 requires Scottish ministers to review and report on the provision of independent advocacy funded by them for the first time within 2 years of when this provision comes into force, and then every 4 years after that. Scottish ministers will be required to publish a report and lay it before Parliament outlining an assessment of whether provision of independent advocacy has increased during that review period. And if that has not happened, that report should set out what steps they intend to take to ensure that availability of independent advocacy services does increase before the next review period ends. So this will ensure greater transparency of what is being done to ensure that this independent advocacy is available to those who really need it to be empowered. And it ensures that Scottish ministers deliver on the approach supported by the Scottish Independent Advocacy Alliance of incrementally increasing funding year on year for independent advocacy. And I take on board the comments there of the Minister that the sector doesn't want to be overwhelmed, but I think this incremental approach is going to work well going forward, and I think these amendments help to provide the right direction for that. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call Paul Sweeney.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and I would like to extend my thanks to the Minister and Mr Whittle, Member of South Scotland, and Mr Ruskell, Mid Scotland and Fife Region Member, who have all submitted excellent amendments to support the provision of independent advocacy. I think it's heartening to see such cross-party support for independent advocacy, and I hope we'll be able to see this support continue long after this bill has passed into an Act of Parliament to ensure it is given good effect in the country. The support for these amendments across the Chamber today hopefully shows how highly independent advocacy is valued by members across the Parliament and our commitment to building up a stronger independent advocacy sector in this country. We know that for many of our constituents, the many different government bodies, private providers and third sector organisations that they have to encounter and navigate when trying to access care can be a confusing and distressing experience. And it's probably the least of the things they need to deal with. So the work of independent advocates means that those constituents know that they don't have to try and navigate those complex systems alone, and that they are instead able to have expert advice and assistance that is always on their side in getting the best outcome for that person. So for that reason in particular, that Labour will be supporting all of the amendments in this group, as together they will put independent advocacy at the heart of social care, while also creating a duty on ministers and government to build up and support the independent advocacy sector in this country. This is a major step forward in legislation, and while we know there is still a lot of work to be done out there about increasing provision for independent advocacy support across Scotland, this is nonetheless a step forward in legislation, and I hope that the Parliament will join Labour in supporting these amendments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Sweeney. I now invite the Minister to wind up.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As other members have said, independent advocacy is absolutely vital to help people to have their voice heard and to realise their rights. And it sounds like there is consensus in supporting the sector to flourish and grow, as was envisioned by Derek Feely in his review. So I thank members for that.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 44 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 71 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 44. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
The question is that Amendment 71 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 70 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with Amendment 44. Brian Whittle to move or not move?
Presiding Officer.
The question is that Amendment 70 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 72 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Ready debated with Amendment 44. Mark Ruskell to move or not move? Moved. Question is that Amendment 72 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 73 in the name of Mark Ruskell. Already debated with Amendment 44. Mark Ruskell to move or not move? Moved. Question is that Amendment 73 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call Amendment 45 in the name of the Minister. Already debated with Amendment 44. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. Question is that Amendment 45 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. We move to Group 12, Projection of Care Needs. I call Amendment 46 in the name of Jackie Billy, grouped with Amendment 51. Jackie Bailey to move Amendment 46 and speak to both amendments in the group. Ms Bailey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. And this too is a short group. Let me speak to Amendments 46 and 51. To transform social care, it is important that we have a better understanding of projected needs, and by doing so we will be able to assess the progress being made for the people of Scotland. This amendment gives us the opportunity to be data-driven in our pursuit of social care reform. By Scottish ministers producing a report before the end of 2026 and then every 5 years thereafter on projected social care needs over a 10-year time horizon. We will be better able to therefore plan for the future and deliver the change we all want to see. Amendment 51 is consequential to Amendment 46, and I commend both amendments to the Chamber and move Amendment 46.
Thank you, Ms Bailey. And I call on the Minister.
I welcome these amendments from Jackie Bailey. I'm committed to increasing understanding of social care needs to inform and support health and social care reform. Last week, the Scottish Government published an analysis of self-reported unmet care and support needs in older adults aged over 65. Amendment 46 builds on our evidence-led approach, requiring ministers to periodically evaluate how needs may change in the coming years and continue to develop our approaches to further increase understanding, particularly around the kind of needs that are unmet and why. As I've said in other groups this afternoon, I'm pleased to support data and evidence gathering with a purpose, and I encourage all members to support Amendments 46 and 51.
Thank you. Jackie Bailey to wind up, press or withdraw Amendment 46.
Nothing to add, Presiding Officer, other than I will press Amendment 46.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 46 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. We move to Group 13, Social Care Market Monitoring. I call Amendment 74 in the name of Katie Clark, group with Amendments 75 and 85. Katie Clark to move Amendment 74 and speak to the other amendments in the group.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I speak to Amendments 74, 75 and 85 and thank the Minister for her time in discussions since Stage 2 so that amendments could be agreed to improve tax and ownership transparency. And I'm also very grateful to her officials for their work in the drafting of amendments. Amendment 74 requires Scottish ministers to make publicly available a report on the state of the social care market in Scotland every 3 years. And that report could contain information about the composition of the social care market by reference to factors such as the scale of the economic operators in the market, their status as not-for-profit bodies, public bodies or third sector bodies. And the report could also include information on the level of profit being made by operators in the market or the tax status of operators. We know that the Scottish care home sector involves significant amounts of money, but also faces significant challenges with quality of care, staffing resources and worker pay, which the STUC indicates now lags behind the rest of the UK. We've seen a change in the nature of the sector, but also ongoing funding pressures leading to the closure of a growing number of care homes, particularly in rural areas, with almost half of care homes nationwide reporting a decrease in placements. As I say, we know that there's significant amounts of money in the sector. Amendment 75 lays out that Scottish ministers may require a person to supply them with information that is in the individual's control and which may be relevant to the Scottish minister's function of reporting on social care markets. And Amendment 85 subjects regulations to the affirmative procedure. So all of these amendments are about transparency and about information and about accountability to the taxpayer, and I'd be very glad to take an intervention.
Alice Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to Katie Clark for giving away. And again, the Lib Dems are interested in these amendments. I just wonder, it's clear that she's done some work with government to bring them up to competence. I just wonder what analysis Katie Clark and government officials have done on the impact this might have as a disincentive on private providers to enter the care sector in Scotland if it proves too onerous. Because we have a situation, particularly in the Highlands, where care homes are closing hand over fist. We need to attract new providers into the sector. What analysis has she done on the impact of their interest in Scotland?
Katie Clark.
The focus has really been on looking at some of the issues associated with the changing nature of the ownership of the sector. And I'll speak a little bit about that and perhaps come back to the point that Alex Cole-Hamilton is making, because earlier on in the debate I spoke about some of the issues relating to the offshore ownership in the sector, which is increasingly an issue. And I'll maybe say a little bit about one particular situation, because we know in general across the UK there are 5 large chains that account for nearly 20% of beds, and that's according to work done in 2016. I suspect that the figures are more a concentration in terms of ownership now. An example that members might be aware of or might have been involved in as constituency representatives is the collapse in 2011 of Southern Cross Healthcare, which was owned by the Blackstone Group. The consequences of that affected 31,000 care home residents across the UK, and with many care homes in Scotland, including in the constituency that I represented at that time. And many of those Southern Cross care homes were sold to Four Seasons Healthcare, which is owned by Jersey-based equity firm Terra Firma. In April 2017, 220 care homes and 17,000 residents were affected when that organisation too became bankrupt. Four Seasons, like many private equity operations, consists of complex corporate structures, and the Financial Times reported that it consisted of 200 companies arranged in 12 layers in at least 5 jurisdictions, including several offshore territories, and tax avoidance and profits shifting were central to the operations in a model that is known as financialisation. So there are clearly very significant issues in the sector, and I think the example maybe that Alex Cole-Hamilton is thinking of is perhaps a slightly different scenario than that one. But the nature of the report that would come to this Parliament, which, as I say, is about improving transparency and about scrutiny, is actually looking at those issues in terms of who is owning the sector, how is it being operated, is it being operated in the public interest? Because what we know is that when there's a failure in the sector, it affects our constituents. And Southern Cross is a very good example of that, because we know the distress that's caused when a care home goes bust or ceases to operate, and the difficulties it places on those that rely on that service and indeed their families. So all of the amendments in this group are geared towards transparency and scrutiny, and perhaps bringing some of the issues that Alex Cole-Hamilton is bringing to the Chamber today to the fore, because we know there's a range of different providers within that sector, from small family-owned organisations to third sector organisations to the kind of multinationals and offshore trusts that I've been talking about today. Of course, I'd be happy to give way to
Paul Sweeney.
Thank my friend for giving way. She's making a very powerful point. I think that the stats I've seen is that 77% of the care sector in Scotland is owned privately, and that the average profit extraction per bed is around £4,000, according to figures from the Scottish Trade Union Congress. So I think having greater analysis of that rent extraction effectively from care is really important to drive public policy, because it's clearly an unsustainable model.
Katie Clark.
Indeed, and as Paul Sweeney knows, it's our money that is being spent. It's our money that is going to pay for these services, and it's that this Parliament needs to be interested in. So the purpose of these amendments and the discussions that I've had with the Minister are about ensuring that there is accurate information provided to this Parliament on a regular basis, so that this Parliament is able to debate these issues, have an understanding of what's happening in the sector, and make public policy decisions on that basis. And I very much hope that the Parliament feels able to support the amendments today, and I move the amendments in my name. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Clark. I now invite the Minister.
I welcome and will be supporting these amendments from Katie Clark. Amendment 74 and the supporting Amendment 85 requiring ministers to report on the social care market in Scotland are an important step in enabling the increased financial transparency in the market, something which I know stakeholders have been calling for. It will for the first time give a clear picture of the social care market in Scotland on a national basis. In order for ministers to produce reports on the shape of the market, clearly they'll need to have the necessary market information, and Amendment 75 will give us the powers needed to obtain it. I appreciate that service providers may be concerned about the potential burden of data collection on them, as raised by Mr Cole-Hamilton, but having regard to the benefit of this information about the state of the market in the public domain, I do believe the requirement to provide information relevant to producing such reports is entirely proportional and indeed minimal. The report is only every 3 years, and we will of course work with the sector on implementation. I encourage all members to support all of the amendments in this group. Go ahead.
Alex Cole-Hamilton, please.
I'm gratified for the clarification offered by both Katie Clark and the Minister. My intention of raising these points of these interventions was not to question the need for greater transparency in the market. I think they've articulated both very well why this is needed. It's just, making sure that this is a surgical instrument, as surgical as possible, so that we don't have any unintended consequences of perhaps dissuading additional providers from entering the marketplace.
Minister.
We're keen to ensure, as I said, that the requirement to provide information is proportionate and minimal so that it doesn't cause a burden on those people operating in the sector, and certainly would be keen, given we are keen for a healthy market in Scotland, particularly the Highlands, an area very close to my own heart. We're very keen to ensure that we don't dissuade people from coming into the sector. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I now invite Katie Clark to wind up press to withdraw Amendment 74.
I move my amendment.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 74 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division. Members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Brian Whittle.
My app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Whittle. I'll ensure that is recorded. Point of order, Alec Rowley.
I voted yes, President Officer.
Thank you, Mr Rowley. I'll ensure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Tim Eagle.
Apologies, my app wouldn't connect. I would have voted no.
Thank you. I will make sure that is recorded. Mr Eagle. Point of order, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Mine didn't connect either. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I will ensure that vote is recorded. Point of order, Shona Robeson.
I think I connected and I think I voted yes, but just wanted to check.
I can confirm your vote was recorded, Ms Robeson. Point of order, Tess White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms White. I'll ensure that is recorded. Point of order, Bill Kidd.
Yeah, connection error. Thank you. I would have voted yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Kidd. I'll ensure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 74 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 92, no 25. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Call amendment 75 in the name of Katie Clark, already debated with amendment 74. Katie Clark to move or not move?
Move my amendment.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 75 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Alexander Stewart.
Still having difficulty connecting, I would have voted no. Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I'll ensure that is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 75 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 91, no 26. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Call amendment 76 in the name of Carol Mochan, already debated with amendment 66. Carol Mochan to move or not move? Question is that amendment 76 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 77 in the name of Carol Mochan, already debated with amendment 66. Carol Mochan to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 77 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 78 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 44. Mark Ruskell to move or not move? That is moved. The question is that amendment 78 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. We move to Group 14, Reports on Bill Costs and Operations. I call Amendment 81 in the name of Brian Whittle, grouped with Amendment 87. Brian Whittle to move Amendment 81 and speak to both the amendments in the group. Mr Whittle.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Amendment 81 seeks to place a duty on ministers to prepare and publish a report on the outcomes of this bill. Quite frankly, I shouldn't have to say any more than that, but given the reluctance of the Scottish Government, I have to say that given the significant revisions this bill has gone through, I think it's important we are able to monitor and evaluate how this bill is performing on the ground. Much of what I have included in the amendment must be in the report is already collected. However, this bill establishes the National Chief Social Work Advisor and the National Social Work Agency. This is a new position and a new body of which data has not been collected previously. We also have a number of changes to the rights for breaks for carers. Most of the data around carers is already collected via the Carers Census, is already held by the third sector organisations or is already held by local authorities. Lastly, as we know, this bill seeks to be the legislative vehicle for information sharing and usage between individuals and organisations within the health and social care system to allow for digital integrated health and social care records. The Digital Health and Social Care Directorate already provides updates on their work, but is not required by law. This amendment is about there being a factor of scrutiny that is needed in a bill such as this. Turning to Amendment 87, I am aware from my meetings with the Minister that the financial memorandum has been revised and she has appeared in the Finance Committee to take questions on it. However, given the significant revisions of the bill, I believe it is right that the cost of this bill is calculated and published before commencement. My concerns and the concerns from stakeholders during the committee evidence sessions on the bill around the cost are echoed by the Law Society of Scotland, who said, We remain of the view that the impact of the bill on improving outcomes for the end users of social care services will depend on the details of implementation, which must be fully costed, evaluated and consulted upon to ensure that the bill's objectives are achieved without unintended consequences. In the end, I think this report will ensure the Government is able to budget appropriately in the future so that the provisions within the bill are fully funded. I say again, most of the details of required and the data required is already collected, and I move the amendment in my name.
Thank you. I now call Stephen Kerr.
Well, Presiding Officer, I'm rising to speak in support of Amendments 81 and 87, both of which stand in the name of my friend and colleague Brian Whittle, MSP. These are modest yet essential additions to the bill, amendments which aim to strengthen accountability, embed transparency and, most importantly, shift our focus from what we spend to what we achieve. Let me begin with Amendment 81. This provision requires Scottish ministers to prepare and publish a detailed report and evaluation of the intended outcomes every 5 years. Not a bureaucratic exercise, but a practical tool for ensuring that the aspirations of this bill are not just articulated in law, but delivered in practice. Far too often, we legislate with the best of intentions, only to leave the impact unmeasured. We are not, as a Parliament, particularly good at post-legislative scrutiny. I think that might be an understatement. This amendment seeks to change that. What matters most is not the input, the money we spend, or the number of strategies published, but the outcomes we deliver. How many young carers are now getting the breaks they need? Are the adult carers seeing the support plans they've been promised materialise on time? Are the new rights and services the bill envisages being accessed equitably across the country? And are we improving standards in the workforce and integration of services as we claim? The report required by Amendment 81 focuses on precisely these kinds of questions. It includes specific metrics, like the number of carer statements produced within new statutory timescales, the uptake of short breaks, the delivery of the digital health and care record. But it also includes space for reflection on the broader impacts, especially around service standards and structural changes, like the new National Social Work Agency. The time frame, 5-yearly reporting, strikes the right balance. It avoids overburdening government or services with annual paperwork, while ensuring each parliamentary term sees at least one comprehensive assessment of delivery. And that allows members, committees, stakeholders and, crucially, the public to hold government to account. Amendment 87 complements this by addressing financial accountability. It requires that any regulatory making powers under Section 47(2) are exercised. Ministers publish, before any regulatory making powers under Section 47(2) are exercised, ministers publish a report on the estimated costs arising from the bill. This is not about second-guessing legislative intent. It is about equipping Parliament with the fiscal clarity needed to make informed decisions. There is a long-standing tendency in government of all colours to announce new powers and duties without a clear sense of the full financial consequences. Amendment 87 counters that tendency with a straightforward principle: transparency first. These two amendments speak to the same concern, that we must move beyond input-driven policy making and focus squarely on outcomes. We need to know, not assume, that the interventions that we pass in this Parliament in legislation are working. And that's particularly true in an area as vital and personal as social care. Families, carers and workers deserve more than promises. They deserve proof that the system is improving. Presiding Officer, these amendments would improve the bill. They would ensure that delivery is not just monitored, but measured. They are reasonable, proportionate, and entirely consistent with the spirit of the legislation, and I commend them to Parliament.
Thank you. I now call Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I welcome Mr Whittle's amendments in light of the concerns around the costs associated with this bill. And I know people don't like to hear this, but around £31 million has been spent to date. There are at least 200 civil servants working on the bill, and they paid millions to KPMG and other private sector consultants. Not a single penny went towards increasing care packages. So we need to make sure that this bill will be implemented and the money is there to do so. It is therefore my sincere hope that lessons are learned after this bill is passed today, and the government moves away from framework bills that have little detail and even less financial robustness. I move that we support Mr Whittle's amendments.
And I call the Minister.
I do not support any of the amendments in this group. As I've already said this afternoon, we have to be mindful as a Parliament that we are not imposing needless administrative burdens on the public sector, wasting taxpayers' money and diverting public servants needlessly away from frontline duties. Go on.
Brian Whittle.
Appreciate the Minister giving way. Minister, you already collect most of this data. Where's the administrative burden?
Through the Chair. Minister.
So Amendment 81 would place ministers under an extraordinarily vague duty to gather data that is not otherwise being collected. There's a list of things that it is to include, although data is already collected on much of what's listed, but that list is expressly declared to be non-exhaustive. The amount of data that could be collected but is not is near infinite. Much of the data that's not collected is not collected precisely because it would have no utility. And yet that's the very data that Amendment 81 would mandate the government to collect. I've supported amendments this afternoon that require the government to collect information and report on matters where there is clear, demonstrable value in doing so, on fair work, on the state of the social care market, on the provision of independent advocacy services. If Mr Whittle had brought forward an amendment identifying specific information that he wanted collected, I might even have supported him in that. But I cannot support such an incredibly vague duty on ministers to collect whatever data isn't otherwise being collected. I think it would be irresponsible to do so. So I ask members not to support Amendment 81 to allow care providers to focus their resources where they're needed most.
Martin Whitfield.
So taking the intervention. Can I ask, in the light of the contribution with regard to post-legislative scrutiny and the ability for a Parliament to return to this, what were the government's thinking and how do we see that encompassed in this bill, which actually in its latest form was created entirely over that period of time where post-legislative scrutiny has been a consideration of this Parliament? Minister.
So I'll come on to Amendment 87, which the member has brought forward as a retread of amendment that Brian Whittle lodged at stage 2, which I think the committee rightly rejected, and I'm disappointed to see that Mr Whittle's brought it back. So the effect of that amendment would be to hold up the coming into force of every reform in this bill, pending further reporting. So let me be clear, Parliament has well-established mechanisms in place for scrutinising the costs and impact of legislation. Indeed, Mr Whittle, as a member of this Parliament, has every opportunity to question the government at any time on its spending decisions. I repeat what I said at stage 2. This amendment is simply a cynical attempt to slow things down by adding to the processes for assessing the cost of legislation that this Parliament has chosen to put into place.
Stephen Cairn.
Very disappointed, Presiding Officer, to hear the Minister describe these amendments as cynical, when what we're trying to do is put the focus and emphasis on the impact of this legislation in the lives of the people who receive this service. I think she should reconsider the description of the motive that my colleague Brian Whittle has in bringing these amendments. I don't think she's doing her argument any favours by describing his approach or the approach of those who support this amendment as cynical, and I hope she will reconsider.
Minister.
So, given the only purpose of these amendments is to hinder progress on vital reforms such as improving the flow of information through our health and social care systems, delivering breaks for carers and delivering Anne's Law. That is why I have used the term cynical. I have not used it lightly. I urge members to reject both amendments in this group.
Thank you. And I invite Brian Whittle to wind up. Press to withdraw Amendment 81. Mr Whittle.
Yes, Deputy Presiding Officer. Cynical, am I? Cynical, yes. Well, I would like to, yeah, okay, well, I think good intentions are one thing, well, actually, how you deliver that is the other thing. And if you don't measure it, how on earth do you know whether your good intentions have come to pass? Exactly. The reality is this, most of the information required is already collected, and actually this amendment gives the power to the Minister to determine what is in there. I find it quite frustrating that once again the Government are trying to hide behind some sort of legislation. So, as I said, good intentions are one thing, but actually delivering on the ground is another. Something this Government, over the time that I've been here, have been very poor in their delivery. So I'm going to move the amendments in my name and hope the rest of the Chamber see sense and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
The question is that Amendment 81 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Parliament's not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Christine Graham.
Despite the technicians' endeavours, for which I applaud, I have been unable to vote, but I would have voted no.
Thank you, Ms Graham. I will ensure that vote is recorded. And the result of the vote on amendment number 81 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 50, no 60. There were 7 abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. I call amendment 79 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with amendment 66. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Presiding Officer, I'm happy to withdraw in favour of a UK Labour Government delivering for social care workers in a way that the SNP has simply failed to do for 4 years.
The member is seeking to withdraw amendment. I think it's a not move, Ms Bailey. But anyway. Call amendment 80 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with amendment 66. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. Question is amendment 80 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are not agreed. Agreed. Parliament will have a division, and members who cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 80 in the name of Jackie Bailey is yes 91, no 26. There were no abstentions. Therefore, the amendment is agreed. Call amendment 47 in the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 44. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 47 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call amendment 48 in the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 44. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. Call amendment 48A in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with amendment 68. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Move, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 48A be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call amendment 48B in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with amendment 68. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Move, Deputy Presiding.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 48B be agreed to. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. The Minister to press or withdraw amendment 48 as amended.
Press.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 48 as amended be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Call amendment 82 in the name of Mark Ruskell, already debated with amendment 44. Mark Ruskell to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 82 be agreed. Are we all agreed? That is agreed. I call amendment 49 in the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 44. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 49 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. That is agreed. I call amendment 83 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with amendment 68. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Moved.
Question is that amendment 83 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. Call amendment 84 in the name of Paul Sweeney, already debated with amendment 68. Paul Sweeney to move or not move?
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 84 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 50 in the name of the Minister, already debated with amendment 44. Minister to move formally.
Moved.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 50 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 85 in the name of Katie Clark, already debated with amendment 74. Katie Clark to move or not move?
Move.
Thank you. The question is that amendment 85 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division and members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. Point of order, Ros McCall.
Sorry, my apologies. It didn't connect, but it now looks as it's gone through as a no. Thank you.
I can confirm it was recorded, Ms McCall. And the result of the vote on amendment number 85 in the name of Katie Clark is yes 92, no 25. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore agreed. Call amendment 51 in the name of Jackie Bailey, already debated with amendment 46. Jackie Bailey, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 51 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Parliament is agreed. I call amendment 86 in the name of Katie Clark, already debated with amendment 54. Katie Clark, to move or not move?
Not moved.
That is not moved. I call amendment 87 in the name of Brian Whittle, already debated with amendment 81. Brian Whittle, to move or not move?
Moved.
The question is that amendment 87 be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Parliament is not agreed. There will be a division of members should cast their votes now. And the vote is now closed. And the result of the vote on amendment number 87 in the name of Brian Whittle is yes 50, no 68. There were no abstentions. The amendment is therefore not agreed. And we move to group 15, short title, call amendment 88 in the name of Brian Whittle, in a group on its own. Brian Whittle, to move and speak to amendment 88. Mr Whittle.
Deputy Presiding Officer, to many people, this bill does not constitute true reform and is no reflection of what it was set out to do. It's a shadow of what it should have been and has been subject to divisive debate throughout. However, I do acknowledge there are provisions within the bill that will obviously benefit many people across Scotland, and I do feel that the content matters more so than its name. So in the spirit of a lack of cynicism, I will not move this amendment.
Thank you. I call Alex Cole-Hamilton.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm saddened that my colleague Brian Whittle isn't going to press this amendment. I won't either. But I think it bears repeating that in this chamber we're sent to this place to pass legislation, the solemn duty of passing legislation that is competent, is relevant and is accurate. And frankly, right now the bill before us does not represent the title of this bill is not accurate of what it represents. I think in the foothills of this legislation, the government had grand ideas about completely reforming and reshaping the care sector through a means that we fundamentally disagree with, but recognise that it would still have represented a reform. This bill has now been utterly hollowed out with the removal of the National Care Service, the welcome removal of the National Care Service from its pages, which represented a ministerial power grab and nothing more. A lot of time and money has been wasted on this, to proceed in this sort of vague fiction that this is some kind of reform would have been failing in our duties to pass relevant legislation. But if Brian Whittle is not going to press the amendment, neither will I.
Call the Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I don't support the amendment from Mr Whittle, and I'm grateful that he's not going to press it. The short title of a bill should give a fair summary of its content, as it helps to index the statute book for users of it. Social care and support, which is what Mr Whittle proposes, fails to meet that standard. The bill is significantly concerned with healthcare as well as with social care. Its current short title, which was changed at stage 2, properly signifies the full range of its content by referring to care in the round, which is a precedented approach in the conventions for assigning short titles. We did rehearse these arguments during stage 2. At the time, I explained that the short title needs to reflect the content of the bill. It is disappointing that it has come back at stage 3, but I'm grateful that Mr Whittle will not be pressing this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to confirm, Mr Whittle, you're withdrawing the amendment.
I'll not be moving.
Brian Whittle seeks to withdraw Amendment 88. Does any member object? No member objects. Therefore, Amendment 88 is withdrawn, and that ends Stage 3 consideration of amendments. As members will be aware, the presiding officer is required under standing orders to decide whether or not, in her view, any provision of the bill relates to a protected subject matter. That is, whether it modifies the electoral system and franchise for Scottish parliamentary elections. In the case of this bill, in her view, no provision of the Care Reform Scotland Bill relates to a protected subject matter. Therefore, the bill does not require a supermajority to be passed at stage 3. I'll have a brief pause while members leave the chamber before we move to the stage 3 debate, but I would urge them to do so as quickly and as quietly as possible.